Victoria, is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Brown-haired albino was unbuttoning his coat, his eyes on Cermak, who was shaking hands with Roosevelt.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, Tony. A lovely gesture.
I just wanted to remind you and your administration that you have my full and enthusiastic support.
The albino assassin was reaching under his coat, but I grabbed his arm and pulled it away, and his hand came back empty, the gun still under his arm as his coat flapped. I buried a fist in his belly and doubled him over. And when he came up, the snout of my 9mm stared him in the face.
You got you this time, fucker!
Sounded like firecrackers, and the muzzle flash above the crowd looked like fireworks, but this was something else. Blurred figures in the crowd were falling, and a stubby, bushy-haired brown little man in a white shirt standing up on a bench was swarmed like a come-to-Jesus meeting got out of hand. Meanwhile, the ex-blonde was pulling away, and I swung at him, and he went down, unconscious, as the mass of people around us were heading to my right. I moved against the tide towards Cermak, pushing, shoving, and got to that touring car where Miller and Lang were crouched over the fallen Cermak, red spreading from his left side under his unbuttoned suit coat.
Where? Where were the goddamn bodyguards?
I had the blonde, Your Honor. He didn't fire the round. Some bushy-haired little creep.
This was no time to tell him he'd been shot by his son-in-law's gardener.
What the hell? They got me after all, Heller.
The crowd was turning into a mob. Miller, Lang, and I were hovering over Cermak in the quiet of the storm.
Heller, get your people out of the way. We need to move the president and his vehicle out of here.
For Christ's sakes, Cermak's been shot. Take him with you. Get him to a hospital.
Roosevelt, sitting in back, heard me.
Put Tony in here and get us the hell out.
The shooter's big revolver was clicking on an empty chamber now. But that must have had an 8-round rod, as I found myself on a battlefield where bleeding audience members wandered like wounded warriors, helped by their dazed loved ones.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Burnett.
Well, greetings, Imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Rob-casting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 1048. One of the great things about this channel, one of the things that I've loved, I dare say pioneered for YouTube, is making this interactive. And one of the great joys really in my life, and I mean this sincerely, is getting letters and getting feedback from everybody. You know, I do read all the comments on the pages. Sometimes I have to refrain myself from answering, but I find more often than not, this audience that watches this show is one of the more thoughtful groups of people that I've come across. I mean, when people put keyboard to virtual paper, I find that the feedback that I get from you guys and gals, and however you identify across the 28 known galaxies, is invariably really insightful, really interesting. And, you know, I didn't know that was going to be the case when I started this channel, because I didn't really know what this channel is. Some people would say I still don't. But one of the things that I've, when I first turned on, when I got this microphone, well, actually this is the second iteration, the Frederick Douglass version died. So this is the second version. Maybe I'll one day I'll get that Frederick Douglass sticker again and put it back. I miss my Frederick Douglass sticker, one of the great American. If you don't read his 4th of July speech every 4th of July, you're not an American. I'm just saying. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to read. You should at least be aware of his 4th of July speech, because it's one of the great, Frederick Douglass was one of the great American statesmen. But that's neither here nor there. Hearing from you guys is great. I wanted to do, a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on Superman. I mean, what a polarizing motion picture. Almost as polarizing as our current political climate, which I find interesting. So I've received a lot of interesting letters, not just about Superman, but there's a few letters about Star Trek. There's a few letters about a lot of different things. And I figured I would give you the floor. You know, I love hearing from you, and I love sharing the letters. And if you want to join in, obviously you can either tip via, it's in the description where I normally put the articles I read, or this, obviously, the super chat feature. If you, no pressure or anything like that. I'm just saying, if you want to weigh in, I do, you know, I'll obviously look at that. But, yeah, I think I've got some great letters, and you know, I don't have them really in any particular order. I did want to start with one, though. No, I can't find it. I don't know where I put it. I'd stacked all these up. Oh, here it is. I found the letter. One of my favorite people in the world is my dear friend, Kevin Rubio. You might know Kevin Rubio. He wrote for Dark Horse, and then they were republished by Marvel. He wrote the Tag and Bink Star Wars comics, which were very close to being canonized in Solo. If you have not read Tag and Bink, you should. Kevin and I are working on an animated series version of the graphic novels, believe it or not, the Geeky Fab Five, that Kevin has written a Bible for, and our company, Imagination Connoisseurs, is producing. So Kevin's one of my favorite people in the world. So he watched Dave and I on Midnight Metal. He tried to get on. I tried to get him on, but you know, Midnight Metal. If you watch Midnight Metal, I mean, it's the kind of show that, you know, we drink on it. We get a little spicy on it. But Kevin didn't. He tried to get on, and he wasn't happy. And you know what? If you're not open to personal criticism, I don't know what to tell you. But here's what Kevin wrote. And I assure you, it's not an admonishment of me. It gets into some great Superman commentary. And maybe it was probably for the best that he didn't get on Midnight Metal so he could present his commentary on Superman in this very cogent manner. But I'm going to read his whole letter. Dude, what the fuck was last night? I'm well aware of the show's premise and tone. It was Metal Night, and I know that Rob Casting, being you uncut and unfiltered, pure Peruvian R&B. But last night, even Tony Montana would have said, "Hey, Rob, you might want to step back a bit." That's not Tony Montana. I don't know what that was. How you doing? I know the show is often your thoughts, and those are a stream of consciousness, and that can be entertaining and even insightful. But last night, you just left the reservation. As a producer myself, I'm of the mind that if you set aside a topic, you, at the very least, owe it to your audience to stay on that topic. And to be fair, in a 5-hour-plus show, a good 3 hours were devoted to your topic, James Gunn's Superman reactions. But toward the 11th hour PST, the show disintegrated into conversations of world cinema, the problems with Americans, sinners, Ryan Coogler, and a myriad of topics that honestly just became word salad because of the raised volume and cursing. Now, don't get me wrong, I curse like a Singapore whore. But it was just interrupting the flow of the conversation. And this was especially frustrating because I really wanted to contribute to the discussion. I'm not angry or even truly frustrated, but I was disappointed because I think I could have made some very cogent points as a person who has actually written for DC and has had conversations about Superman with the likes of Mark Waid, Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, and Dwayne McDuffie. However, at this point, it's neither here nor there, so I just wanted to share my thoughts with you on Superman 2025, and maybe we could talk in the future. Buckle up. This may be a long one. That's what he said. Superman. The character has over 87 years of history and numerous iterations and forms with powers ranging from nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin, Action Comics #1, June 1938, to what if I just move the Earth out of the way? If we had a week, I couldn't list all the reasons that wouldn't work. Batman, Superman, Batman, Justice League of Doom, 2013. His costume and looks are constantly changing from minor adjustments to complete overhauls. Red and blue Superman, everyone? Anyone? It's kind of ridiculous for anyone to say, that's not correct, or that's not what he looks like. You can have your preference, but to say that the costume is not comic book accurate by this point? When Superman first burst onto the screen in 1948 in the form of a Columbia serial starring Kirk Allan, it was quaint. The serial followed the form of the day. People are in distress. Superman saves them. Superman gets into trouble at the end of the episode. How will he get out of this one? See it next week. A low budget kept most of the film grounded, quite literally, in the San Fernando Valley, and when he did fly, it wasn't Kirk on wires. They would hard cut to an animated Superman, but fans of that era embraced it. They did even more so in the 1950s, with the television version starring George Reeves and returning from these serials in its second season. Noelle Neal is Lois Lane, who I met. She's in Superman Returns at the beginning. She's the old heiress that Luthor swindles, and she was absolutely delightful. Again, it follows the convention of the time. It was a big hit with kids and proved to have long legs in reruns because the producers had the foresight to shoot in color from, I believe, the second season on. In the 1970s, for the character's big screen debut, we got a fully realized romantic Americana, pretty much perfect version of the character. Christopher Reeve's portrayal, John Barry's production design, Tom Makowitz's screenplay, and Richard Donner's direction have influenced all other iterations that came after it. Yes, even Man of Steel in 2013. The whole symbol being from his planet, that comes from Superman the movie. Superman Returns, a project that you know intimately, was basically an homage to its predecessor. Man of Steel was a gritty, dark reboot. Superman 2025 embraces its source material unlike any other superhero movie in the past, even the Christopher Reeve one. Not out of allegiance or fan service, but passion for the medium and a mastery of storytelling. James Gunn brings it all to the table, and it's a meal you can eat again and again. He is not asked, what would it be like if Superman was in our world? What if Superman were real? He invites the audience into a comic book world where Superman is real and accepted, where giant kaiju tearing through a city and flying armies of death are just an everyday occurrence. And he pulls it off beautifully. Is it perfect? Will it solve all the world's problems? No. Like you, I agree that the film is too short. I can see the story threads that were cut for time and realize that James Gunn had to serve two masters. James Gunn, the director, and James Gunn, co-CEO of DC Studios. This, by the way, is something that has not occurred in Hollywood since Chaplin and Fairbanks. But the movie does its job. It's fucking entertaining as hell. And it's a 4-quadrant picture, to use the Hollywood vernacular. And it's something most audiences will see repeatedly in a theater to share the experience with others. I know. I'm taking my childhood friend and her 12-year-old son to see it this coming Wednesday. I think James sums it up best in a post dated July 11th, 2025. I'm incredibly grateful for your enthusiasm and kind words over the past few days. We've had a lot of super in Superman over the years, and I'm happy to have made a movie that focuses on the man part of the equation. A kind person always looking out for those in need. That resonates so powerfully with so many people across the world is in itself a hopeful testament to the kindness and equality of human beings. Now Kevin goes on to his thoughts. David Cornsweet is not the chiseled granite body of the previous film. His body is that of a farm boy who's been working in the fields all his life, more Frank Quietly than Jim Lee, and his mannerisms and tone take their cue from All-Star Superman. David, as a person, can be sarcastic. He's a dad, he's humble, he's somebody you want as a friend. He's Superman. I gotta say, David Cornsweet, I've been watching a lot of interviews with him. What a great guy, and he's a total nerd. And look up, I didn't know this was him, but years ago, there was a guy driving in a car doing the end scene of Star Wars. What was this? The end scene of Star Wars. That's actually him. Well, I don't know, it's all like 10 years old or something. Check it out. Lois, for the first time, and I mean the first time ever, Rachel Brosnahan's Lois is not the damsel in distress. Superman doesn't save her once, and the only time she's in the line of fire is because she's trying to save him with the help of Mr. Terrific. And we see her doing real investigative journalist stuff. Admittedly, this part is not new. We saw Lois doing this in Superman Returns and the Zack Snyder films, but somehow this time it doesn't feel like just a plot advancement. It also reveals character, which is a duality that the writers strive for when crafting a script. Nicholas Hoult gave us the most ruthless, evil, despicable, and yet credible Lex Luthor. You just want to put a gun to his and all his minions' heads and pull the trigger. But that's not what Superman does, and it crystallizes his character. Though it's nice to see Lex get a well-deserved comeuppance from another character. I never realized how much I needed a screen-actualized version of Superman's dog. Many know by now that he was based on James' own rescue dog, Ozu. By the way, if you don't know what Ozu is a reference to, you should. And that he was James's into that whole story. Krypto is just a delight every time he's on screen. The cast, animators, and VFX team did an incredible job of making you believe that not only was he there, but he was a real living being, despite James' account that Rachel Brosnahan is a terrible mime. By the way, I have to say that the upcoming Supergirl, if you have not read Tom King's story, Woman of Tomorrow, Krypto plays a big role in that. And I think it's going to go a long way toward defining the Supergirl character. It's an incredible miniseries. It's quite brutal. It's very different, I think, than the Superman movie that we got. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to it. Jimmy Olsen is the only sub-character that gets a fleshed-out B-plot. Skylar I can't even pronounce this. Gizzardio brings a fresh new take to the character. We see him actually trying to break a story, and his association to another character is fun, surprising, and purposeful. There's talk of James wanting to develop a Jimmy Olsen TV series for HBO, and I have a proposed title, in your parlance, Jimmy Olsen, Mac Daddy. It's important to remember, while I didn't get this right about the Forever People the other day, because the Forever People are part of Jack Kirby's Fourth World, but in Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, a lot of the Fourth World, including Darkseid, were introduced. That's right, Darkseid and all that was introduced in Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. The planet staff, the rest of the characters get shortchanged, and that is my biggest gripe with the movie. Mine too. You can tell he had this great cast. Wendell Pierce, totally wasted in the movie. Wendell Pierce is one of my favorite actors. I could listen to him read the phone book. I love him. If you haven't seen The Wire, his bunk is one of the great characters of all time, like Sipowicz in New York, NYPD Blue. I love Wendell Pierce. And in Treme, he was also excellent. And the fact that he didn't get much screen time, I really want, I don't know if he's going to do this, but I really want James Gunn to do a movie, a director's cut that's a half an hour longer, that gives his great cast, supporting cast, their due. You can see that there was more in the Daily Planet, but I suspect, like you, that James and Peter put on their CEO hats and said, let's just focus on Superman. The Justice Gang. It's not perfect. I would have liked to have seen more development of the characters, but what's there is really good. Nathan Fillion, who has played Hal Jordan several times in the animated films, is pitch perfect as Guy Gardner. Isabel Merced had very little to do as Hawkgirl, mostly screaming, but she had a nice story moment toward the end. The standout, though, is Mr. Terrific. This is my first introduction to the character. He didn't pique my interest at the launch of the New 52, even though our mutual friend Eric Wallace, who, by the way, Phil Lamar played in my movie, Free Enterprise, did a run with the character, but James has hooked me in, and I will be checking out the comics. Now, Kevin goes on to say spoilers from this point on, but we've all seen it. So, hey, if you don't want to know about it, I don't know why you're watching this show anyway. So, spoil away, Kevin. Number 4. I loved Alan Tudyk's performance as 4, a.k.a. Gary. That's how he's listed in the credits. He's just doing a kindler version of K2SO. Yeah, but it works. Jor-El and Laura. Bradley Cooper and Angela Serafin give a take on Superman's parents that may surprise audiences to know it's not new. Ideas of Jor-El being not so benevolent and sending his son to rule over the earth has been introduced in Smallville in the comics. I thought it was a fresh take, but this may rub audiences the wrong way. Krypto's real owner and mom, Millie Alcock, there's a James Bond name for you, is in the last scene as Supergirl, and we find out that she's Krypto's true owner, which in hindsight makes sense to this story. I thought it was hilarious when she shows up, because if you live in LA and you've dated girls extensively, you know that all girls dress up their dogs. And the fact that Crypto is wearing a cape and he has his S symbol, of course it's Supergirl's dog. And Crypto plays a big role in the Tom King Woman of Tomorrow story. So I really look forward to seeing Millie Alcock as Supergirl and Crypto. And let's face it, Lobo. Can't wait. However, this version of Supergirl has not really sat well with a lot of fans. They're so used to Melissa Benoist's characterization of Supergirl, who, like Superman, just wants to do good. Unlike the Supergirl of the Arrowverse, this new Supergirl is based on Tom King's Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, with art by Bilquis Evely and colors by Matt Lopez. This version of Supergirl is lost. She's a party animal. Unlike Kal, she grew up a Kryptonian. She had friends and family, formed attachments and ideology, maybe even had a boyfriend. All she knows is that she lost everything and everyone she ever knew. She's not like Kal. She left her planet with a purpose, to take care of and watch over her infant cousin, and even that was taken away from her by an encounter with a black hole. She doesn't know what the fuck truth, justice, and the American way are. She's hurt and depressed, and she's coping with it by drinking away her sorrows, and all she has is her dog, a friend from her planet. All in all, I love this film. I've seen it twice, and I'm going to see it again. Christopher Reeve is still my Superman, but this was a great start to a new universe. I hope I live to see it. My friend Kevin has been combating cancer for a while, and I hope he's here to see it too. So, Kevin, thanks for writing in. Great letter, and I really appreciate you taking the time. You are a great writer, and I'm privileged to know you, sir. So thank you for writing in. What a great comment. He-Man Forever. He retracted his message, but he did send in, I don't know if it's a super sticker, super chat. I want to say this, at CinemaCon we did see a lot of behind the scenes of the Masters of the Universe movie that my friend Guy Dias was the production designer of, and it looks pretty banging. Travis Knight, who did Kubo and the Two Strings, and the Transformers film Bumblebee. I think the movie looks to be absolutely outstanding, at least what I saw. This is interesting. This letter comes to me from Nathan Sword, S-O-O-R-D. Is it Sword? Not sure, but I want to say Sword because Nathan Sword is a cool last name, spelled S-O-O-R-D. Nathan writes in and says, "Hi, Rob. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to know what it's like to be a part of the entertainment world. I grew up watching several classic films and TV shows over the years like you. I have a deep appreciation for the art. I went to college and I got a degree in communications. I worked in the news industry for a few years as a producer in hopes of being able to transition into film, but I saw that most of the film work was only gig jobs. I spoke with someone who had experience in producing films, and they mentioned that it isn't all that glamorous. You seem well connected and have several years of experience under your belt. Why aren't you an executive at Warner Brothers, pitching ideas for films? If you don't mind me asking. Does the film industry reward those willing to climb up the ladder, or is it more of who you know that helps you get your foot in the door? Thanks, Nathan." Nathan, well, that is quite an interesting question. I mean, how do I even begin to answer that? But okay. So I always, from the time I was really young, when I started really watching, I go all the way back to when I was 5 years old and saw The Twilight Zone and Star Trek and War of the Worlds and Planet of the Apes for the first time. And I was both obsessed with storytelling and film. And I was never particularly interested in actors. I was always interested in who made these things because early on, Rod Serling, I'm like, who's Rod Serling? Even though he's on The Twilight Zone, he also created The Twilight Zone. So Rod Serling was one of my heroes. Gene Roddenberry was one of my heroes. George Pal was one of my heroes. Ray Harryhausen, a hero. And a lot of these people had some weird overlaps, especially when I was a kid. So I always wanted to get into film. But I grew up in Seattle, Washington on Mercer Island, and I didn't know anybody that worked in the film business. But what was really interesting about Seattle was it was a great movie town. It was one of the test markets in 1978 of the Laserdisc format. So even before, and I had wealthy friends whose fathers would buy VCRs and had bootleg videotapes on Betamax of Star Wars in 1978. So movies were tangible to me. And then I started working in a video store when I was 13 years old in 1980. And there were no video stores. I worked in what I've been told was actually the second video store in the United States. It was started by a man named Weston Nishimura, who later became the founder of the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America. That used to be a lobbying group, and they had a big meeting every year in Vegas. But he started what was called Video Space, the first video store in America, and I'm sure someone can tell me that I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that Andre Blais, the father of the home video industry, really, started a store called Video Station here in Los Angeles. Video Space was sort of the Seattle equivalent of it. Andre Blais started Magnetic Video and was really, there were other people involved, but he was really the father of bringing, what he did was he licensed 50 titles out from 20th Century Fox. And some of those being things like The French Connection. And he founded a company called Magnetic Video. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. And they put out laserdiscs and videotapes, pre-recorded movies. And then, of course, 20th Century Fox had to go back and buy their own movies back from Andre Blais. And he became the president of Magnetic Video. And Big Daddy Ken Ross, who I work with on the Star Trek Blu-rays with Roger Lay Jr., Ken Ross also was one of the very first people. He was one of the great TV executives, the great home video executives at CBS. I got to work with him in the entire Star Trek The Next Generation restoration project he spearheaded, but he started working with Andre Blais. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I started working in home video, and I worked in home video in Seattle from 1980 to 1988 until I moved to California. So from the time I was in junior high school all the way through college until I moved to LA in 88, I was in the video industry. And during that time, home video was really explosive growth. There was a lot of connection between retailers and rental houses with Hollywood. There was promotions being run by the studios, especially with our store chain. And then, of course, I went from working from Video Space, and then I moved over to a company called Silver Platters, which is still, it's under different management, but I worked at Silver Platters, and I was the manager and buyer of, at one time, a 4-store chain of the Laserdisc section. And Silver Platters at one time was the largest optical disc-only retailer in the world. So it was really interesting. I mean, I got to see things like Paramount was the first studio that, for instance, had sell-through tapes. Back in end of 82, Officer and a Gentleman and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, were the first tapes that were priced at $39.95 to sell. So it was really interesting. That time, and people thought that home video was going to destroy movies. Little did we know it would take streaming to do that later. But it was, so I was involved in that, and at the same time, the Seattle International Film Festival was going on. I was writing a film column for my high school newspaper, and at that time, a lot of people would come through Seattle because per capita we had a lot of movie theaters compared to other cities. So Seattle was a big launching point. People like Richard Rush launched his film The Stuntman in Seattle. So there were a lot of people I got to meet on the way. Like my first director that I interviewed was Martin Brest for Beverly Hills Cop in 1984 when I was in high school. There was a company called Thunder Media. Shout out to Louise Hathaway. I have no idea if she's even still with us, but Louise Hathaway lied and would tell publicists in Hollywood that I wrote a syndicated column for high school newspapers, which was kind of silly, but she told people that. That's why I was able to interview people like Martin Brest, or like when a movie called Lady Jane came to town, Carrie Elwes and Helena Bonham Carter. I mean, it was and going to the film festival and getting a full series pass and seeing 150 movies in a month, and we had the Neptune Theater. I was just ensconced growing up. I was a complete movie fanatic. My entire life was watching movies, studying movies, being a movie retailer at home video, going to events, interviewing directors. I mean, it was an incredible time, and all I ever wanted to do was make movies. And, like V'ger, learn all that was learnable about both the industry. And then I made some friends. In 1984, I met a friend named Taylor White at the 42nd World Science Fiction Convention in Anaheim. My friend Shade and I I'm telling you, this is a long, ridiculous story. Suffice to say, I've been interested in movies for a long time. So when I moved to Los Angeles and finished up at USC, I got a job. A friend, when you're in L.A. in the late '80s and early '90s it wasn't so much about who you knew. It was more about working. Like in Hollywood, work begets work. People want to work with those they can trust and that are most of all fun to work with and can deliver. You have to be both talented and personable. That's what people want, because working on movies is very long hours. It's a very difficult thing. And the first job I ever had, I've told this story before, was on Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. I was hired as the art department PA, just a few weeks out of college. And I'll tell you something. I had never really been on a movie set before. And, my first day on the job, again, I've told this story, but I'll tell it now. My first day on the job, I was working for, at the time, New Line, which bought the rights to the Texas Chainsaw franchise. New Line was making the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and when I started, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, was just wrapping up, and they were shooting the last effect sequences at a building called the A1 Globe Building right off Robertson, just next to Beverly Hills. And so, like, my first day on the job, they gave me the keys to a Ford Dually and an Econoline van and $10,000 in cash and a list, and they said, don't come back till you bought all this stuff. And then I had to go to the A1 Globe Building to pick up things, not even knowing what was going on there. But what was interesting was C.J. Strawn and Mick Strawn, who were brother and sister, were trading off being the production designers of the New Line films. And back then, they weren't just doing Nightmare on Elm Street. They were also doing movies like The Hidden, things like that. And it was fantastic. And as soon as you get into that ecosystem, suddenly, I'm just the lowly PA. But when you're the lowly PA at a $3 million horror movie, you're working for the prop department. You're working for the art department. You're working for whoever needs you. And we built 2 of our sets in the mountains, the hills behind Magic Mountain. We built a setup in Palmdale. And it was incredible. It was just an incredible experience seeing, Ken Foray, who was in one of my favorite movies of all time, Dawn of the Dead, was in the cast. Viggo Mortensen was in the cast. It was Jeff Burr, the late Jeff Burr, directed it. I think K&B, I think that was the first time the K&B guys were working on something that I was on. And, it was incredible. It was like a dream come true. And then after that movie was over, I was hired in this crazy. I was so lucky. I got hired by Bill Young, who's the senior vice president of physical production at Warner Brothers, and he was looking to find interested people. He started what was called the management trainee program, and he wanted to bring young people in to work at the studio and learn how to be a liaison between. Every movie is kind of its own business. And a lot of times movies are shot on location. They're not shot at a studio. And what the physical production department at Warner Brothers did was we didn't choose what movies got made, but we oversaw the physical production, the day-to-day production of every movie. So Bill was there, and then there were 3 executive production managers. There was Kurt Newman, whose father directed the original The Fly. There was Ron Smith and Penelope Foster, and they were 3 executive production managers, and each one of them had like 5 movies to oversee. So I worked directly for Kurt Newman, and I was like, what was it like? Were you on the set of Rocket Ship XM? But it was amazing. I was on the Warner Brothers lot, and I could go anywhere. And let me tell you, I went everywhere and met everybody, and I was doing things I should not have done, and they should never have unleashed, a 22-year-old kid on a studio lot. I was 22. And it was, if you're motivated and you're on a lot, you can do a lot of things. So, yeah, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And the things I learned, the places I went, the people I would see. I could tell I've got a million stories. But the problem, and so from then on, I got to I did a lot of different things. I was at Warner Brothers for a year and a half. I left after I finished working because we were supposed to stay for a year and figure out, well, what did we want to do? And then I moved off and I went to Silver Pictures and was reading scripts. And then I worked for Penelope Foster and Jenny Lutugend, who produced Free Willy. So I worked on Free Willy as the producer's assistant. And then I ended up jumping ship and working for Tony Gardner, the effects company, his company Altarian Studios. And I worked on the movie Cast a Deadly Spell. I worked on Army of Darkness. I worked on the Swamp Thing TV series. I worked on Mick Garris's Sleepwalkers. Did I say Army of Darkness? That was awesome. Yeah, I got screen credits and all these things. And then the problem was I was not focused. Because I was a big fan too, so it was very easy to be a film fan in LA, but I was doing whatever I could do, and I didn't buckle down and focus. If I was smart, I would have written a script while I was at Warner Brothers and utilized the studio and made a low-budget independent movie at 22 or 23. That's what I should have done, but I was too like, wah! So that was a mistake. So my entire career in the entertainment business has been... I've tried to balance my extreme fandom and interest in cinema as a fan and an art form with my professionalism. And I think, to be honest, that has been a drawback in my life because I was never able... it's not that I wasn't able to focus. I was very focused when I was working on something. I was just interested in too much stuff. Like, people were like, well, what do you do? And I was interested in film editing. So I started editing. Even though I was editing when I was a little kid, making Super 8 movies. But so I took up film editing. And I started working with Peter Billingsley. We edited our first feature film, Arcade, for Full Moon. And so the 90s was full of me doing all kinds of crazy things. I worked at CAA and William Morris as a reader, a staff reader at the two biggest agencies at the time. I was directing music videos. I was doing all kinds of stuff. And I was learning the Avid system when the Avid system was new. I was working for an ad agency that Craig Mazin worked at. Craig Mazin we worked at an ad agency called Jacobs and Gerber, and he was a copywriter, and he was, he's Princeton educated, highly educated dude, and he was writing copy for like movie ads. He wrote the tagline "Danger runs deep" on the Crimson Tide. That's the ad line for Crimson Tide. Very smart guy. When I was working at Jacobs and Gerber, one of the artists there actually painted the art for the Chinatown movie poster. I'm like, oh my God, so I've had the best time ever. And in 1998, I had started editing. I was working on, I was editing low budget features for first time directors. I'd become the de facto post-production supervisor because I knew the whole Avid workflow and getting a film into negative cutting, would oversee all of that. So I was kind of a one-man band there, but I directed my first feature, Free Enterprise, my only feature that I've directed. And it came out in 1999. We won some awards. I won a Writers Guild Award, Best New Writer from the WGA with my partner, Mark Altman. So, I mean, I've just done a lot of things, and I've had a great time. But I've been on the indie fringes. I've never had any really huge monetary success, although my partners and I, we did basically find the Agent Cody Banks franchise, and I was one of the producers of Agent Cody Banks and its sequel. The less said, the better. And, I produced a horror film for Warner Brothers and Joel Silver called The Hills Run Red. Tango Shalom, which came out a couple years ago. Now Forbidden Tango. I produced and edited that. We have a new movie coming out called White Devils. You saw the trailer for it. But that's been my experience. I mean, in a nutshell, I've got a lot of stories to tell. But I've been in the indie world. I've never really been in the rarefied big commercial world. Although, one never knows. I'm still trying. So, if that makes any sense to any of you, I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those things. I've told so many stories about that time on this show. Hollow Manjin Boo 2 says, haven't seen it, but I watched the EFAP stream. That message from Jarrell and Laura is just a travesty, in my opinion. Okay, I've got some thoughts on this, and I was saying this on Versus on Monday, Chris Gore's show. I love this cup, by the way. It's got big cups. I drink lots of water, so big cups are great. So a lot of people were upset that whether the message was true or not, but let's just assume for the sake of discussion that what Jarrell and Laura were saying is true. As a science fiction fan, and as somebody who's been reading, the great works of science fiction since I was 9 years old, the morality of the planet Krypton, especially, if you think about human history and how our our first world civilizations treated at the time, quote unquote, third world civilizations, you know, when the conquistadors went to South America, Central America, and all that. Look what they did to those people. Look what we did here in the Americas to the indigenous people. Now, if you're Jor-El and Laura, and you are looking at Earth, and you're looking to send your only son to save him from the destruction of your home planet, if you're thinking about, okay, what should... They know something about Earth, whether they had advanced scouts here or whatever. What they were telling him, like, it might not be our morality, but you're talking about an alien civilization, and that what they were talking about being pragmatic. I mean, you, Cal, are going to be the strongest person on this planet, and apparently, despite any essays you might read to the contrary, they believe that Superman could procreate with the women there. Not unlike what Genghis Khan did when he conquered Asia. So this idea that he was going to spread his seed for parents, what he would be doing then would be strengthening the bloodline of Earth. And that was just another way that he could advance the planet. And it's interesting because in Superman the movie, of course, Jor-El tells Superman he should not interfere in the affairs of humankind, which makes sense because, as in Superman Returns, Clark says, you know, I hear people crying out for a savior, and I can't be that savior. And from a science fiction perspective, and using science fiction allegorically to delve into what the responsibility should be, the idea, I mean, I don't think what Jor-El and Lara were saying, if this message, by the way, turns out to be entirely genuine, is necessarily a bad thing. They weren't necessarily saying, you know, rape and pillage. They mentioned concubines, you know, and there are cultures on this planet that polygamy is something that is normal for them. And we've had shifting morality throughout human history. So I think it was an interesting way to go. And what it does, I think, is it puts the onus back onto Earth itself. That the Clark's family that found him and raised him, and these weren't like messianic parents. These were not, as Paul Chatto says, they're not like country bumpkins. I mean, he was like making fun of the fact that they're country bumpkins. I think that they were more salt of the earth, middle of nowhere kind of people, and they were good people, good Americans, and they raised Clark to be salt of the earth and have a strong sense of morality and helping people. So what Lara and Jor-El might have wanted is immaterial. They're dead. Their planet's destroyed. And it's the Clark's adoptive family and adoptive planet that is going to shape who he is and the morality that he espouses and internalizes. So I thought that was an interesting way to go. It's just from a science fiction standpoint, it changes the lore, but I think it kind of makes it more interesting because, you know, why does Krypton have to like be like Earth, you know? And I think I don't have a problem with it. And Superman decides to not be that way, and he's heard this and he's horrified. Now, you know, even Mr. Terrific said that it was true, the message was true, but it's interesting. So, you know, I don't know. It's a good question to contemplate, but I think that's what great science fiction does. A performing artist says that Superman is the Barbie of 2025. It mirrors the state of the U.S. today, and it gives our country a deeply needed, heartfelt, hopeful hug during a hopeless time. Yeah, but you know, I mean, if you look through our history, is our time hopeless? I mean, I think more so than ever, we're just aware of the continuum that we live in. Great things and terrible things are constantly happening all the time. And I think that's been true of all of human history. It's just now we're very aware of all of it happening because of our communications technology and social media. And I think that, I mean, we didn't live during the Black Death. We didn't live during the Great Depression. I didn't live during World War I or World War II, you know, or when the Revolutionary War was fought or the Civil War was fought. I mean, I think that we're mostly doing okay. Now, Are there terrible things happening? Yes. What's happening in Syria? What's happening in Sudan? That no one's protesting those things. Wonder why. But there's lots of terrible things happening around the world, but there's also great things happening all the time, and they're happening at the same time. And sometimes, people are more interested, especially promoting on social media, the bad things that are happening. But I think there's just as many good things that are happening. There's amazing technology. There's amazing advancements being made. And, hey, if you believe some people, in 2027, we're going to have something very transformative happen. I hope I'm on the right side of that one, whatever that may be. But we'll see. But yeah, I do think that Superman gives the world a big hug. He-Man Forever goes on to say, hey, Rob, I loved the Superman movie, and I'm excited about the future of the DC universe. Could you see an adaptation of DC's The New Frontier as a Justice League movie? Oh, I love that. I've got the Absolute Edition right back there. I would love to see that happen. I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be more along the lines of the Justice League, J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen's Justice League comic, which I love. The omnibuses are great, and I've been looking back at those. I think it's going to be more along those lines, but you never know. But I do love New Frontier is great. If you haven't read Darwin Cook's New Frontier, read it. It's one of the great DC comics ever. Brandon sends in a $20 super chat. That's very nice of you to say that, Brandon. Or send it in. Superman was definitely a bro like Superman. The movie was fun, glossy, and techy. Could this mean the Batman in this world will have the glossy chrome gadgets and refined suits, paying homage to Val Kilmer's Batman? I think we're going to get a different flavor of Batman, but I think definitely so. I think you're going to have, Batman, I don't think it's going to be as goofy as Batman Forever or certainly Batman and Robin, but you're going to have a Batman that is going to be, not the grimdark. Like, I love what Christopher Nolan did, setting Batman in our world, and he's really he's not even a meta-human. He's a crime fighter. He's a vigilante lawman. And I like the fact that it was firmly set in quote-unquote the real world. And then, Zack Snyder bringing in the more fantastical science fiction elements of it all. The problem was, I thought that, at the end of the day, when you're making a Superman movie, it still should be 4-quadrant. And as much as I liked the grim, dark nature of what Zack Snyder was doing and the dreams of apocalypse that Batman was having and Nightmare Batman and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, it was a very, I think, adult take on it, and it wasn't, say, family-friendly. And it was also, as I've said this before, I thought, even though 1001 Johnny won't agree with me, I thought it was very mean-spirited. And I think at the end of the day, the Marvel Universe has had terrible things happen. We watched Thanos crush the life out of Loki, but the entire universe isn't mean-spirited. And they do a really good job of threading that needle. So, I don't know about the super suits of Val Kilmer's Batman, but it'll be interesting. Mr. Torrance says, I saw The Wicker Man today. The School Maypole song was something else. I think it supplanted 28 Days as my favorite British horror. What's yours? Cheers. Oh my God. Well, first of all, the original Wicker Man's it's one of the great horror films of the early 70s. I think it's 73. And, there's been various versions of it over the years. I have a beautiful box set, the 4K version that came out from Studio Canal. Was it Studio Canal? It's a great film. But in terms of British horror, man, there's a lot of great British horror movies. I'm a Hammer film fan, and I just got the Quatermass movies. Talk about British sci-fi horror. I love the Quatermass stuff from Hammer, actually. But I do like, those mid-70s British horror movies. Like the Abominable Dr. Phibes. Thing about Wicker Man is it's again set in the real world. There's not a lot that's fantastical, and the idea of a religious zealot and the whole, Christopher Lee as Lord Summerisle. Come on. But I do like things like Theater of Blood is one of my favorite British horror movies. And I love Theater of Blood and the two Dr. Phibes films. But there's a lot of really great mid-century British horror. There's a really interesting Roger Moore movie called The Man Who Haunted Himself. I wouldn't call that a great movie, but I like it a lot. Or Nicholas Roeg's brilliant Don't Look Now, which, you know, if you don't know Nicholas Roeg, he was a cinematographer turned director, but he made movies like Bad Timing, Essential Obsession, and Eureka. Bad Timing's a great movie if you haven't seen Bad Timing, but Don't Look Now. That's peak British horror. But I love The Wicker Man. Dave Miller says Lois Clark's Superman and Mr. Terrific were good. The writing, dialogue, camera, story, and direction sucked big time. Oh, come on. I thought the movie was beautifully shot, actually. Supergirl is unlikable. Jor-El and Laura thing was dumb, messy, overstuffed, too much gun humor. I can understand that. I mean, it's certainly a different flavor. I liked it because it really reminded me of the mid-'80s Justice League comic, which I thought I would hate, but I ended up loving. So, but I get that a lot of people, it's not everyone's jam. Totally understand that. And, but I get where you're coming from. And I do think the movie could have lasted to be 2.5 hours, I think. But again, like Kevin pointed out in his letter, I think they wanted to keep it tight and streamlined. And they cut it down to the bare essentials and made it just a Superman movie. The movie had a lot. I thought it was really interesting, and I really thought the world was interesting. You know, Lex Luthor, the crazy, you know, his pocket universe, and I don't know what I'm saying, you know, all the time. His pocket universe, and even the monkeys with the things in their heads reminded me of a Silver Age comic. That could have been a cover of a Silver Age comic. Crypto chasing after the flying squirrels, you know, he's all mesmerized and locked into a bowl. I mean, there were so many things I loved about it as a lifelong comic book reader, but I understand if you're expecting Zack Snyder's Man of Steel or even Superman the movie, this movie was the entire opposite direction from that. And I understand why a lot of people didn't dig it, because it's not their flavor of Superman. So I understand where you're coming from. William Powell says, Rob, I have a steak with your name on it at Comic-Con, but that's not till next week, and it'll probably be rotten by then. Oh, I know what you mean. No, hey, let's go. I have panels, by the way, if you're coming to Comic-Con. I have 2 panels on Thursday. I'm doing the 1985 Greatest Geek Year Ever panel and the Inglorious Trexperts panel. And then on Friday, the great Max Allan Collins, who wrote True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, who also wrote the Dick Tracy comic for the Chicago Tribune for 15 years, and also wrote Batman for DC in the 80s. I will be doing a panel with him, and then, of course, I can't believe we're still doing Starship Smackdown, but that will happen on Sunday of next week. Josh Lasota said, hey, Rob, haven't commented before, but you're the man. If you need any music, just let me know. Well, I will. You know, people have been... that piece of music that you hear over the opening credits, that was done by Alexander Bornstein, who I'd worked with a lot. He scored True Noir, that great music you heard in the clip from True Noir. By the way, True Noir, my latest work that I directed and produced and edited and all that Max Allan Collins wrote. You can go to truenoir.co right now and get it. If you haven't got it already, all 10 episodes are there. Lavery Adam says the previous Superman movie talked about genetic engineering. If it was about making Earthlings stronger, why not that? Hey, I agree. I mean, you know, why not? Look at what Zod was saying. And, but I think everybody sees, you know, Jor-El, especially Marlon Brando's, his voice and his portrayal of Jor-El and the way Jor-El has been portrayed since then in various media. People see Jor-El and Laura, they want to believe they're nice people. I don't have a problem with that because Krypton is a very different civilization than we are. And as a matter of fact, if you look at Superman the movie, half those people were dicks. You've got Zod, Ursa, and Nan. They don't believe that, you know, you will bow down before me, Jor-El, both you and then one day your heirs. They're not nice people. And the rest of everyone on Krypton's not even listening to Jor-El. Jor-El, be reasonable. I mean, these are not necessarily these benevolent, kind folks. And think about it. I mean, Jor-El's like, fuck everybody else on Krypton. I'm just going to send my son to get saved. You know, could he have gotten some other people out? You know, probably not. But hey, you never know. And one of the things that really bothered me about Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, as much as I love Man of Steel, why didn't they get a bunch of people off Krypton? They had ships. I mean, you know, of course you had Zod and his people, but You could have gotten some more people off, couldn't you? I don't know. Maybe you couldn't have. Maybe there's something they know that I don't know. This comes in from SC. Hey, Rob, first time super chatting. Do you think if the Snyderverse was released as an Elseworld story after the DCEU, it would have got more appreciation? Probably not. I mean, look, as I said, I'm a huge fan of Zack Snyder's Justice League. It inspired doing Midnight Metal. I think that his version of the DC universe appeals to a certain sensibility, but it doesn't appeal to everyone else's. I mean, his version was definitely heavy metal. I mean, it was definitely a prog rock cover of your favorite Yes album from the 70s. I mean, it's a different flavor. Now, I liked it because of how serious it is. But in a way, I think there's a lot of people that thought of it as being too serious. Obviously, it really struck a chord with people because a lot of people love Zack Snyder's vision. And, you know, getting Zack Snyder's Justice League was one of the great wins of all time for fandom. So good on them. And I love that movie. And I see those movies as science fiction films. They're science fiction takes on those characters. And they're pretty impressive. I mean, how many people die in those movies? And then how many people die in Man of Steel in Metropolis? And then you get to rewatch all that death and destruction again. I mean, the 9/11 imagery was really rough, man. And then Apocalypse, I mean, Earth's being transformed during the nightmare sequence. It's pretty hardcore. I don't think that those movies are, I think that they're I call it the Man of Steel trilogy or the Justice League trilogy. And I don't care that, I mean, yeah, you could get Zack Snyder could make another 4-hour Justice League movie and they defeat Darkseid. Do we need to see that? I kind of like the fact that we have what we have. We got Justice League, which is the most disappointing movie I think I've ever seen in my life after Return of the Jedi. That's a whole other story. But, yeah. You know what we got's cool. It's almost like 2 movies. It's 4 hours long. Tony Reyes says, what do you think the King Sweaty, the late John Schnepp, would have thought of Superman? I think he would have loved it. John Schnepp wanted to like things. He was the first person to find things that he liked in something. When it came to comic books or toy design or whatever, John Schnepp, I don't think would have appreciated a lot of the negativity that has come into the fan space since his passing. Because John's go-to position, pretty much like mine, except when it comes to modern Star Trek. Oh my God. I'm going to contain myself. But I think John would have liked it. I think he would have had a great time. I think the last movie I saw with him was Infinity War. And sitting next to him, we were literally bouncing up and down practically the whole time. We were so excited. And one of the great regrets of my life is that I didn't get to see Endgame with him. Man, would he have loved Endgame. So yeah, I do miss the King of the Sweaties, but I think he really would have liked Superman. He would have loved it. Our friend RRTNZ Down Under says, as a sci-fi fantasy action, Gunn's Superman is dumb and fun. As a Superman movie, it's the inverse of Man of Steel, getting the opposite things right and wrong. Superman has gone from Messiah to damsel. Well, I think, you know what? The thing is, if Superman was undefeatable and he was, look, John Byrne, the first thing he did when he started writing Superman after Crisis on Infinite Earths in the mid-'80s was depower Superman. Because if he's as powerful as all get out, then nothing threatens him. Then, the fact that Superman, I liked the sort of change that Superman could get hurt. He's not going to die because his Kryptonian physiology won't allow him to, really, I don't think. Although he does die in The Death of Superman. But I like the whole idea of, the repowering with the sun, the yellow sun. I thought it was all really, really cool. Oops. I like that. But yeah, I don't think he was a damsel. I mean, you got to give him credible. He's got to be credible things can threaten him. You know, I really love the metamorpho thing with the kryptonite on his face and stuff. And you saw, oh my God, he can really get hurt. This is not cool. Well, I've caught up with super chats and tips so far. So let me jump in. I got more letters. I got lots of letters. This one comes to us from Drew Douglas. Greetings, Rob. I think it's been at least a year or more since I last wrote you. Just one of those things where sometimes I have, as Harvey Korman in Blazing Saddles would say, a transient node of thought. Then I think, I should write Rob about this. But like everything else in life, that node of thought seems to be lost in the great radar screen of life. Then someday, sometimes out of nowhere, that blip will be back on the screen again. Before I get into the main subject of my letter today, I have a story for you that you may find amusing because it involves some of your friends. I noticed back in March that my captain and your captain, James T. Kirk himself, William Shatner, turned 94 years young. Can you believe that? William Shatner's 94. I met him at a convention several years ago where he also signed my Wrath of Khan poster. When I learned about him turning 94, it occurred to me that maybe I'm taking our good captain for granted because I'm used to seeing his name on guest lists for conventions all the time. I did see Leonard Nimoy speak at a convention once, but didn't get the autograph and have regretted it ever since. Many other genre legends have left us over the years that I never had the chance to meet, so I decided to make the trip to GalaxyCon's Nightmare Weekend in Chicago back in May. I did get to meet the Shat once again, and I also got to listen to his panel. But believe it or not, that was not the highlight of my weekend. I forgot the exact name of it, but I attended a panel that had something to do with TV production, the TV writing panel. And who should be moderating the panel but Mark A. Altman and Ashley Edward Miller of the Inglorious Trexperts. No Darren, however. They both talked for about 10 minutes, and then they asked me if I had any questions because I was the only one in the audience. The best part was Mark telling stories about working with Uwe Boll on House of the Dead. Afterwards, they both shook my hand, and instead of saying, "Thanks for coming," Mark said, "Thanks for putting up with us," because no one else did. How many people can say they had their own personal panel with the Inglorious Trexperts? It made my day. And now to the matter at hand. First of all, I want to say, Ashley and Mark, I met Mark at Comic-Con in 1994. So every year at Comic-Con, I think back to when I first met Mark, I had already been a fan. Here's another thing, another Hollywood story. So I had been a fan of Mark Altman's because he wrote these like 100-page year-end wrap-up stories about Star Trek The Next Generation for the late, great Cinefantastique magazine. And he would review all the episodes, and he would interview everybody in the cast and crew about the making of the season. And I lived for those. I mean, I gobbled up everything he wrote. And then him and Ed Gross had written some books. And so he and Chris Gore founded a magazine called Sci-Fi Universe. And the tagline was, "The magazine for sci-fi fans with a life." And I was working for Full Moon Entertainment. We had just done Arcade, and Full Moon, you know, if you know Full Moon, Subspecies, Trancers, Dollman versus Demonic Toys. It was a great place to work. We were basically making a movie a month, but we had made a movie that Peter David wrote called Oblivion, and it starred George Takei, and it was about cowboys and aliens. And Sci-Fi Universe was sponsoring a screening with Full Moon, and Mark and I became friends at that screening, and we were sort of joined at the hip. And he made me the critic at large, so I was writing for Sci-Fi Universe magazine, and I was editing films and stuff, and then I met Dan Bates, and Mark and I ended up making our first feature film together. And I met Ashley because he was friends with another friend of mine named Zach Stentz, who was an entertainment journalist, and then they started writing. And Zach and Ashley, we brought them on to rewrite Agent Cody Banks, which was their first professional film sale. So Ashley and Zach wrote, because of me and Carrie David came on board and got their first sale. They rewrote Agent Cody Banks, and when we sold it to the studio, we thought Agent Cody Banks was going to be James Bond meets Ferris Bueller. We sold it to MGM. We sold that movie to MGM in February of 2002, and it went into production in May of 2002. February to May. That never happens. It was insane. But then Zach and Ashley went on and they wrote X-Men First Class, and they were writers on X-Men First Class and Thor. So they've done quite well for themselves, and they've both been doing a lot of TV. I work with Ashley. I was the animatic editor of 24 episodes of the animated series Dota Dragon's Blood for Netflix. So I'm glad you had a great experience with them. They're both great guys. And now to the matter at hand. The main subject of my letter today concerns Kickstarter. Kickstarters. I know you have some experiences with these, Rob, both good, film noir, true noir, and bad, Star Trek Axanar. Almost 2 years ago, and I would assume many in the Post-Geek singularity, contributed to a Kickstarter for a 2-book set about the music of film composer Jerry Goldsmith, written by my friend Jeff Bond, who wrote the liner notes for the True Noir soundtrack that I'm working on now. Taylor White, the person in charge of this particular Kickstarter, had done something similar with a Kickstarter for a new edition of the book Rod Serling's Night Gallery and After Hours Tour. Yeah, Taylor's printed a lot of books, and they're beautiful. He did a great job. He also reprinted an article that was going to be in Cinefantastique called Return to Tomorrow. He worked with Lucas Kendall, which is one of the greatest making of accounts ever on the making of Star Trek the Motion Picture. Anyway, after I made my contribution, and a few months later, we had the books. So why would this be any different with the Jerry Goldsmith books? We've been sent several updates over the past. These books would be in our hands in 2025. I'm sorry if this subject has been discussed on Robservations previously. I just wondered if you could provide any insight. I can. And, Lucas, who worked with Taylor, wrote kind of a hatchet piece on Taylor. Now, I've known Taylor, full disclosure, for 41 years. And he's one of my oldest, dearest friends. Now, the Goldsmith book has been produced. You can get a PDF of it, and you can read the whole thing. Now, it's a beautiful book that Jeff Bond, it's kind of his life's work. It's a 2-volume set on composer Jerry Goldsmith's entire career. It's exhaustive. It's incredible. What it hasn't done, it has not been printed. Taylor hasn't been able to print it. And part of the reason for that, from what I understand, is the cost. Because they would print these books in China. And with all the craziness that's happening with tariffs and all that, I'm not trying to make an excuse for this, but I can say to you that nobody wants to print these books more than Taylor does. But it's a cost issue to see if it can happen. But the book was finished, and you can get a PDF of it. But you go on to say, another minor gripe would be with XO6. I don't know what's up with this Nanjin guy. He teased some Wrath of Khan figures at San Diego Comic-Con at least 2 years ago, and still nothing. Is this guy allergic to money? That's all for now, Rob. Hope all is well. Live long and prosper. Drew from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Drew, good question about, for those of you who don't know, if you collect 6-scale action figures, Nanjin Tam is a guy who used to work for QMX, and he comes out of the garment industry, and he has been making museum quality 6-scale Star Trek figures, the best 6-scale Star Trek figures that have ever been made. Now, he's been putting them out consistently, and I don't know how many he had out. I'm trying to think if I have. I don't have any I can reach right now, but I have a few right over there. He's teased a lot of figures. The last figures he had coming out were a Spock from The Cage. Some of the more incredible figures, he put out Commander Krug from Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. He put out Captain Shaw, Todd Stashwick from Picard Season 3. Let's see, I have over on the shelf, you can't see them, Picard from Star Trek Picard, Data T'Pol from Enterprise. They just set up a pre-order for Nurse Chapel from Strange New Worlds, and I just he's making the Gorn from Arena, and I was one of the lucky first 300 people to get it, so I just sent my thing in. Now, he has put out Savik from Star Trek II, and it is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now, the thing about Nanjin is he's a sucker for perfection. Actually, the last figure they shipped was Wesley Crusher, which I was not a big fan of. I thought it was one of their weaker figures. But and I have every one of the XO6 figures except Saru and Michael Burnham. But they will come. They will come. And it just takes a long time. But yeah, he had prototypes, but he's been consistently making his figures. And Nurse Chapel went up for pre-order this week. So, yeah, he's putting him out, and I think they're shipping Captain Sulu from Star Trek VI. They're shipping Valeris from Star Trek VI, Kim Cattrall. I don't know what else. I know Wesley Crusher just shipped. Cage Spock shipped. I don't know what else is coming out. But Exo 6, slow and steady, they will get to those Star Trek figures. Man, they haven't even got us any of our TOS figures, man. I mean, come on. We got Star Trek The Motion Picture Kirk, Motion Picture Spock, and Disco McCoy from Star Trek The Motion Picture, which are dope. But they'll get to them. Have no fear, Drew. But thank you for writing in. Very much appreciate it. Now, here's one. This comes to me from Matteo Romano. And he writes, I've never sent a fan letter in my whole life before this very moment. Although I wanted in several occasions to, especially to your channel, but there's always some form of self-doubt that stopped me. This time, however, something clicked inside me as I came out of the movie theater, doubly so when I listened to Robservations number 1046. Maybe it's because I've been writing a lot on my own since last September, but now I feel compelled to share my thoughts with people that I know would respond and enrich the conversation 1,000 times more than if I just let it stir through my synapses. And none would be a better candidate than you, by miles. Well, that's one way to get your letter read. You can flatter me. I'll take it. I apologize for the black background document, but I'm extremely photosensitive, and white backgrounds have an effect not dissimilar to needles in my eyeballs. I hope you'll like it, okay? And here's the letter. This looks to be, this is quite extensive. You know what? I'm just going to dive in, Matt. Metahumans and Meta-Narratives by Matthew R. Good day to you, Rob. This is my first time writing a letter to you, albeit listening as regularly as I can, personal tasks and commitments permitting. Let me start by apologizing if I pull out any sort of language-related blunders, as English isn't my native language. However, I will try my best to express myself adequately. I will avoid spoilers as much as I can, but I have to mention some story beats to solidify my points here and there. You will be the best judge whether it'll be appropriate or not to read those, even if I don't really believe there's much to spoil about this movie in the first place, except that one big thing. I apologize in advance for going off the rails, but I'm trying myself to navigate the maelstrom of emotions that this movie stirred inside of me. I hope at the very least the read presented some interesting and therefore entertaining points to analyze or reanalyze. The absolute certainty that this film left in me is that I like talking about it more than I actually liked watching it. So I'm eager to follow the next discussions regarding this title in future episodes. I won't lie to you. Superman 2025 kind of melted my brain a little bit, which, by the way, came out on my birthday. Despite my restraint shown in giving into the hype, I still looked favorably and hopefully towards it. Besides, James Gunn has a stellar track record over the years, not only regarding superhero movies, but other smaller titles as well, so he deserved such goodwill on credit alone. And I feel compelled to talk about it to someone that can surely appreciate the intricacies closely tied to whatever orbits this movie, both in terms of narrative and meta-narrative, hence the title. Because in my opinion, there is a giant meta-narrative factor looming over this movie. It sounds ominous, I know, but in a sense, I kind of think it is. It's funny that you say that this Superman is the antithesis of what the character is supposed to be, because to me it goes above and beyond through fiery loops to course correct what the Snyder approach to Superman and the Justice League was. So much so that it focuses obsessively on the most superficial, to a degree, aspects of the character just to hammer home, this is the Superman so many of you have been clamoring to get back to since Man of Steel. I certainly was. At the expense of what to me is lacking gravely in most of the film, which is character moments and exploration. It's even weirder that this is happening in a James Gunn movie because he's one of the best at regaling meaningful, heartwarming, or heartbreaking character moments and interactions. Yet the movie had to cram so much stuff in there that everyone becomes the kind of template or the archetype of itself. Easily, the best character moment in the whole movie is when Lois interviews Superman. if you don't want to spoil, you might say a certain character has a heavy talk with Superman for the first time, and she absolutely dismantles him. I wish I got similar moments between other characters. As a matter of fact, I was craving such moments like a starving man. There are a couple more of such moments, don't get me wrong, but once again, there's so much that gets in the way of the character development, mostly and-thens. The whole movie is basically a big and-then, which in a way is an incredible undertaking, but on the other hand, it makes it kind of hollow, since you almost never get the chance to savor any moment in and of itself and let a scene breathe, which I know you addressed in your review, and I totally agree. The crisis that Clark goes through, not making any spoilers here, when he hits his lowest point, feels quite unimpactful, since he remains the same, save when he has mostly small and harmless outbursts, which self-defeats itself even more by the next scene when he immediately does the most Superman thing he could do. Don't read what comes next if you don't want to spoil the audience, but I mean when he surrenders to the authorities. On the same note, we also never see Clark go through a real arc in the movie. He's the same the whole way through. And we really needed one, since we already don't get an origin story of him where he goes through his first transformation as a hero. In turn, this inexorably takes wind out of the story's resolution sails, therefore forcing Gunn to spell out everything that could have been sprinkled earlier through less cut-and-dried monologues or just by clever showing, not telling, had he gone through a catharsis in the first place. It felt very much like an, in case you didn't get it, here's a foolproof explanation for all you dummies. Superman could have and should have, in my opinion, definitely shouted less and act calmer, especially because of his outburst during his lowest point, so we get a nice contrast from where he was at that point and where he is after he deals with his internal struggle. Maybe his first instinct would be to yell, but after hearing his nemesis' speech, he just deflates and talks more softly, definitely with disappointment and almost pity towards Lex, which would be a very Superman thing to do. Wasn't this supposed to be the movie's #1 priority after all? This is the reason why I said it seems to be going only after the surface aspects in the beginning. I want to give a shout out to Nicholas Hoult, though, because there's been this moment, and it's sad that it's mostly all he was given, where he gets to emote without saying a word, with that smirk of disbelief and renewed sense of self-inflation that was literally top-notch. Once again, at the cost of sounding like a broken record, I wish we got more of that. Instead of this Greek play-esque tendency to enter the scene, shout their lines in the most didactic way possible, leaving zero space for nuance and subtext. On the same note, why didn't we get an actual interview with Lois at the end of the movie? That's a great idea. I feel that might have been the perfect payoff to all of Clark's arc, which now should be more self-aware and be able to conduct it in a proper Superman way, instead of a pompous, immature, albeit extremely well-intentioned and naive guy. That alone would have improved the movie so much, in my opinion, even if I already said the same thing about his final confrontation with Lex. Going back to the meta stuff, I got this distinct impression that the movie is requiring you to do a lot of what I'd like to call meta-diegetic legwork, in the sense that the movie is asking the viewer to know and already accept a lot of what the Superman mythos is, instead of winning you over through the story, giving the viewers barely a few memory refreshers here and there, since it's too concerned to show so much action and be able to do anything else. For example, can someone really buy Lex Luthor being that level of super genius? If you don't have the necessary media literacy baggage supporting your knowledge of the universe, he basically just looks like a very overdressed Elon Musk-esque tech bro. Undoubtedly intelligent, sure, but to the point of building pocket dimensions, portals, and all sorts of high sci-fi contraptions? Personally, I don't think so. But the movie grabs you by the pants and throws you at this whirlwind with the simple premise, I hope you know what Lex Luthor is capable of because we're coming in hot, either way. But if you have to be introduced to the world, since this is supposed to be a reset, this would be too much for someone that's only seen other Superman movies. Could Gene Hackman be able to build what this Lex did? Not given what we see in the movies. Could Jesse Eisenberg do that instead? Not really. Kryptonian technology did all the legwork when it came to creating Doomsday, and we certainly never saw flying robots patrol his headquarters. At least, if we saw Holt's Lex actually build or fix some piece of technology, it would be easier to accept the reality of the movie. as outsiders that are being introduced to this universe for the first time. This is unfortunately the consequence of Marvel already opening the lid of going for a slow and steady build-up towards bigger all-encompassing events, but it's not just that. Gunn's choices felt to me to be also victims of the backlash from the perceived mismanagement of the previous DC universe by roughly half of DC fandom, or more generally movie aficionados, which once again ties back to the looming meta-narrative shadow enshrouding this movie. I would be unfair if I also didn't list the positives. First of all, Mr. Terrific stole every scene he was in, and that is a fact, and proved once again that Gunn can turn every low-tier character into a fan favorite, although Mr. Terrific did lead the Justice Society of America in the comics. But I also liked all of the individual elements a lot, and you can tell Gunn really did lose himself in the pages of comics earlier in his life, asking himself, what would be a cool way to contrast Superman's powers? Which led to the most terrifying body horror thing I've ever seen in a superhero movie that had me literally gasping for air, even if I wanted it to be even more emotionally heightened to revolt the audience even more. But it's the fact that so many of those individual creative elements are all compressed in one 130-minute movie that already by itself throws you into a powder keg without prior chance to really connect with our main character, and possibly the other big figures in the story, is what left me overwhelmed in terms of sheer content and underwhelmed in terms of sheer substance. I would have loved to have seen a movie focused on only one or two at best of these plot elements and delved deeper into them, but instead they were all denied further analysis and attention, whether it's to rush things or whatever other inexplicable reason, or just to make Lex's plan more intricate. That's also a possibility, albeit one I would strongly disagree with. What's for sure is that the movie would definitely have benefited more from a longer runtime, because I felt like it needed time to breathe and better absorb the vibes or moral consequences of our key scenes, and of course get more character moments as mentioned before. Forget half an hour, I would have gladly watched 1 full hour of scenes that makes me better take in this new universe. I'm right there with you, especially since this is its first iteration. But as somebody mentioned, James Gunn was wearing both the studio head. There's no Warner Brothers logo in front of this movie. It's DC Studios, and that's Peter Safran and James Gunn. I think they erred on the side of caution. Look, the movie felt like it was 90 minutes, even though it was 2 hours. And I do think there is this old adage. It doesn't necessarily, a shorter running time does not benefit all the time. Because sometimes a movie that's 2.5 hours feels fuller if you have time to develop these characters. And I was acutely aware they had all these great actors, and you can tell they had more scenes. And if you spent a half an hour just showing us the world. A friend of mine saw Fantastic Four today. He works in exhibition. And we've seen, as I suspected, in the trailers, you see that there's sort of a talk show. That's how Fantastic Four opens, with that talk show. And it's the Fantastic Four have been the Fantastic Four for 4 years, and they're celebrating their 4th anniversary. And the beginning of the movie sort of does what you're saying. It sets up the Fantastic Four and kind of gives you a recap of what's been going on in the 4 years that they've existed. And I think that that is something, the world was so interesting that I think that descending into it would have been a much more, it would have made the movie more satisfying. I thought it was wildly entertaining, but there's so much shit in it, and a lot of it's, the goofiness is right next to the, and I know that Superman falling into frame was kind of cool, but, and I know from what I've heard, the structure of the movie was very different. Like, it started out with the day in the life of Superman, and you saw like a week of Superman going to work and doing all these other things, and it kind of led you in there. And I understand, I get where they're going, but I think I'd love to see a director's cut of this movie. I think that they should totally make an extended cut. And you know what? Because James Gunn is friends with Zack Snyder always made multiple versions of his superhero movies. Maybe James Gunn will, but he's never made an extended version before, so I'm not going to hold my breath. Anyway, so let's see where I was. Yeah, Mr. Terrific. What's for sure is that the movie would have benefited from a longer runtime, because I felt I needed time to breathe and better absorb the vibes or moral consequences of key scenes, and of course get more character moments as mentioned above. Forget half an hour, I would have gladly watched 1 full hour of scenes that makes me better take in this new universe. Although fair is fair. I have to concede that technically everything is tied together, which, given the wildly diverse elements that compose this movie, it's basically a miracle that it makes sense at all, let alone being fairly easy to follow if you manage to keep up. And I can't berate James Gunn for that. He almost deserves a medal. But on the other hand, was it really necessary to go this route? I wish it picked a lane and saved some of the plot lines for future movies, because once again, I found them all individually interesting. Except maybe a couple of cartoony things, but I'm also not unfamiliar with DC's silliness, and I don't feel like criticizing the choice of embracing it. However, I feel compelled to point out the irony of so many people criticizing Batman v Superman for introducing the Justice League, when this one does a similar thing in the first 30 minutes in the first movie. And I'm talking as someone that's always been critical of the Snyderverse, but regardless of personal taste, it had elements that are objectively more structurally sound than Superman 25, and operate overall more like traditional narratives. There's nothing wrong with presenting a character as already established, even though I'm okay with origin stories being retold if they can bring something new to the table, and most importantly are sensibly crafted. That's for sure. And it's that we need something that makes us connect on a deeper level with the main character. As heartwarming as it's been itself, saving squirrels in the middle of a kaiju invasion can only take you so far, and that's why I respect the Batman so much more now. Not that I had real issues with it, but I was kind of indifferent to it. However, if you want to introduce and build upon someone's origin story free, that's how you do it. This movie's structure reminds me a lot of Black Adam, of all movies, actually, which is already not a good sign, except it didn't have 20 minutes of fresh origin stories, and you clearly like Superman way more than you like Black Adam. Except Black Adam wasn't the first title of a new DC universe. If I had to compare this to music, I'd say it's hardly, if at all, a concert opener, in my opinion. If I had to compare it to other media instead, I'd call this a mid-season two-parter of an episodic TV series, which baffles me in regards to this being the course chosen by James Gunn for the franchise's reboot mainliner. Despite the many criticisms of the movie Despite the many criticisms of the movie, I really don't think it deserves hate. Only lots of befuddlement. I certainly enjoyed it for what it was, which to me feels more like a cool showcase rather than a traditional narrative. It's just that it could have been so much more. And I really can't get over how much it either suffers or relies on consequences or elements that have nothing to do with the movie's story itself. I wish I could watch this movie anew with zero knowledge of what's been going on behind the scenes at the administrative levels of DC, just to form an opinion based only on the movie's content, which, despite my best efforts to separate those, I think it's impossible to do at an absolute level. Luckily for me, though, I went to watch this movie with a friend of mine that was available to spend some time together on my birthday. And contrarily to me or you, he knows nothing about superheroes, DC, or any majors, really, production history. His first phrase when the movie ended, I thought I would have been more confused to jump in without having seen the previous movies. And I cannot for the life of me describe the expression of absolute bewilderment on his face when I had to explain to him that this was the first movie of a new universe. Should this letter be read, I sincerely thank you for dedicating your time, attention, and insight into it. I shall treasure it. Cheers, Matt. Well, Matt, this is one of the reasons I like to do this channel and open it up to you viewers to write me letters. I know that English is, as you said, not your first language, but I think that was a fine, beautifully written letter in itself, and I'm sorry if I stumbled through it a little bit. I thought it was a great letter, and you bring up a lot of great points. And I have to tell you, I don't think you're wrong. Like, you know, somebody said to me on Twitter today, if people come out of a movie and they really like it, even though the movie's bad, is the movie a bad movie? And I said, look, if audiences like your movie, how can it be bad? A movie is an entertainment product that is made, in this case, a 2-hour movie. The studio spent a certain amount of money on it. And if audiences come out and embrace the movie, whether you think it's bad or good, or whether it's, look, I'm not one of these people that thinks all movies are subjective. But if audiences are happy with it, doesn't that mean it's a success? I would think so. Now, I really like movies like on this channel, I have frequently talked about the Craig Baxley directed Brian Bosworth film Stone Cold from the early 90s. Stone Cold is what I would call a cheesy piece of 90s action cinema. It's on the low budget side. Brian Bosworth, after the leading actor, Brian Bosworth, whose football career didn't work out after the Seahawks, went and made a movie. And I have to tell you, I fucking love Stone Cold. Craig Baxley, it was a former stuntman. He knows how to stage action. Lance Henriksen is having an absolute blast as the leader of a very bad biker gang that Brian Bosworth infiltrates. Do I think that Stone Cold is like David Fincher's Seven? Do I even think it's like John McTiernan's Die Hard or even The Predator? No. Would I tell somebody, I love Stone Cold, but I know that it's a cheesy film. But Stone Cold knows what it wants to be, and I love it for that reason. I also love, in the wake of Star Wars, there was lots of other countries did these rip-offs. The Japanese did Message from Space. I think the Canadians did Starship Invasions. But my favorite is Luigi Cozzi's Star Crash, or as it says on the credits, Louis Coates. Star Crash is demonstrably not a great movie. Although they got John Barry to score it and Christopher Plummer to play the Emperor of the Universe. And Joe Spinell is Count Zarth Arn with his battleship is a hand in space. But what I love about Star Crash is it's like it would be like the best movie you and your friends made in Super 8 in your backyard when you were like 12. And you have the lovely Caroline Munro. I love Star Crash. Love it. I love everything about Star Crash. Is it good? No. No, it's not. But I love what it's trying to do, and I love what it is, because I think that they totally succeeded in making this bonkers movie. And there's one man out there named Steven Romano. He feels the same way that I do about Star Crash. Now, I would never try and convince somebody Star Crash is a good movie, but I love it. And I think that in the case of Superman, it's interesting because Superman is perhaps the one, everybody has their idea of what they want in a Superman movie. And everybody will tell you that their opinion about what they want. I think when people settle down, it's only been out for 6 days. I think when people get a chance to, when there's a little bit of time and it can kind of settle, I think, look, would I have liked it to be longer? Absolutely. Would I have liked more time to really enjoy what was going on? 100%. But I really had a good time watching it. It was like opening up a comic book. And while I don't have the mythic feeling I got from the first half an hour of Donner's Superman, and while look, I love the apocalyptic battle at the end of Man of Steel when they're flying and he's punching Zod. That's awesome. That's something that's what it would look like. And metahumans fighting over a major motion picture. We're fighting over a major motion picture, but metahumans fighting over an urban area, the destruction would be enormous. But I understand where people are coming from, and there's a lot of people that this was absolutely not their flavor of superhero movie, and I think a lot of people are kind of perplexed by it too. It wasn't what they wanted, and they're rejecting it. But I think in the long run, it's so earnest in what it's trying to do. I mean, look, Isabella Merced, I think she's an incredible actress. And even though she has a little bit of screen time, I bet she had a lot more work, a lot more stuff in the movie. She's a great actress and an incredible personality. And she has a true eternal, there's something about her. She's young, but I would imagine she's going to have a great career because she does have this kind of timeless beauty that isn't so overt that it's overwhelming. And I think she's a great actress. And I think, I also thought that Supergirl in The Flash, I don't care what anyone says, I love The Flash. Don't care. Come at me, bro. But Supergirl in that movie, she was, Callie was that girl was, she was incredible. Incredible. Got to get that hot toy. Anyway, but yeah, great letter. I love hearing what people have to say. So I have another letter coming to us from Stephen Coburn. And Stephen writes, Rob, given you your love of both comics and film, I would love to know your thoughts on my takeaway from Superman, if you're willing. And Stephen also gives me a link to his Substack, Coburn's Corner, and he writes, Superman 2025 is comic book perfection, and why this is the first movie to truly feel like a comic book brought to life. Whenever the movie is finally out on video on demand, I might try my hand at making a video essay on this, so consider this a rough draft. What's considered one of the most famous examples of bringing a comic book to life as close to one-to-one as possible? For me, I think of Watchmen. This isn't to debate whether you like it or not, but there's no denying it does a fantastic job of bringing a page from the Watchmen comic to life on the big screen. That's exactly what Superman does. The only difference is we haven't read the comic. Let me set the stage. I can't personally attest to what reading Crisis on Infinite Earths felt like in the moment because I wasn't born until 1994. I can attest to it, and I don't think I've ever been so breathless reading a superhero comic, at least up until that time. However, being a ride-or-die fan of DC Comics since I was practically born, I know what the New 52 felt like. In August of 2011, I was entering my senior year of high school. Oh my God, I'm going to die soon. And I was not apologetic about being a fan of superheroes and, to be very specific, comic books. I constantly doodled in class when I should have been paying attention. I was not afraid to wear my heart on my sleeve and say that reading comics is, in many ways, the happiest I've ever been. So much so that when the movie Kick-Ass came out the year prior, I had friends and even classmates I'd only spoken to in class tell me they could, without a doubt, see me dress up like Kick-Ass did. To which I'd always say, hell yeah. Needless to say, I had hope and optimism going into the New 52 because that's what my favorite superheroes have always taught me. And yeah, it was mostly a complete reset of everything we knew before, and I was cool with it. I was excited for this total retelling of the universe I love so much. Did everything land for me? No, I'll be honest. I liked quite a bit of it, even some things most people didn't. Same reason I love X-Men Evolution. Same reason I love the 2004 Batman. That's what this new Superman is for the DC Universe in film and television, but I'll get to that in a minute. This movie truly encapsulates the meaning of escapism when you view it with the lens that every 5 to 20 seconds is a single panel, and any dialogue said in that time is word balloons on the page. When a scene drags on a single shot for character exposition like Luthor in the Fortress, it's because that 1 or 2 panels with a few word balloons on each. Lex's head is at a different angle on the second panel, perhaps. Heavy dialogue is nothing new to comics. The same goes for any conversation regarding realism. I saw some people in the reviews saying the scene in the Fortress was unrealistic, because when one robot is destroyed and the sparks fly, Lex doesn't react. And the looking cool of it put aside, he would still feel burns from the sparks. But that's just it. In comics, that does look cool just to look cool, because it's fantasy. Nothing has to make sense because it's meant to entertain. I mean, tell me you can't see that Mr. Terrific garage scene with Lois broken up into a 9-panel grid, and then on the last 2 panels is the dialogue. I can. Especially when you think about who's helping shape the universe behind the scenes. This movie feels like James Gunn wrote a comic script for a 12-issue miniseries meant to be the rebirth of DC Comics and media. I realized why this movie felt so rushed to me the first time. It's because a comic book only has 24 pages to tell a story. The pace is quick. Every 20 minutes or so, you can find specific moments where that is the splash page on page 24. The one that has you going, holy crap, I have to wait a month to find out what happens next? And then, bam, you pick up the next issues and the story keeps going. It doesn't linger on anything, it moves forward. One specific example of that is when the little kaiju jumps out of the van. That is page 24 that says to be continued on it. If this were a TV show and it ended right there, I would feel the same way. Not to mention the action itself is very comic book cinematic. From the hammer to the kaiju to the engineer and Ultraman. It's as action-packed as any comic book fight scene would be. But in between, there are quiet moments and there's story building. A story that is, in many ways, taking everything that came before and mashing it together and then some. Superman has been public for 3 years. Now imagine if you picked up the New 52 Superman or Action Comics on issue 34, roughly 3 years into the New 52. The solicits promised this issue as a great jumping-on point for new readers. I'm not saying it does. That was a random number I picked based on 12 issues a year. I'm just saying, hypothetically. This is what the film is. This is picking up a comic book series right in the middle of it. It occurred to me how much significance it is that Superman has been public for 3 years. That means Lex has been manipulating an overseas conflict for 3 years, all just to kill Superman. Like, talk about next level petty. If Lex is this bad, I can't imagine what Reverse Flash is going to be like. My God. It also means that although Clark and Lois have only been officially dating for 3 months, they've been building a relationship as co-workers, as friends, and now as lovers. When he says, "I love you," and when she says it back, it hits me because I know what led up to that moment. I might not know the details because I don't have to. I know the characters. All I have to do is take all the various depictions of Lois and Clark together over the years and mash them together to fit those 3 years. Speaking of characters, the cast is literal perfection. When I say if you hold on a shot and imagine it turned into a drawing, be it a Jim Lee or a Dan Mora on art, that's the character you'd see on the page. I don't see David, Rachel, or Nicholas. I see Superman. I see Lois. I see Lex fucking Luthor. And I see Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Jimmy, and all the rest of the Daily Planet crew, who 100% without a doubt most definitely need a spin-off, I swear to God. They could probably make a whole other movie with excerpts. They could do an hour-long piece, I'll bet. This cast is every bit their characters as New 52 Superman was New 52 Superman. They aren't the versions of the past, or the versions we think we know. They're all of it, and none of that. They are this version, for this step forward. Superman is Clark Kent. He's a dork who wants to do the right thing. That's why I think the song choice to end the movie is so fantastic. Right after Superman proves his kindness yet again by calling for Gary. Because I'm a punk rocker, yes I am. Well, I'm a punk rocker, yes I am. Because like Clark tells Lois, well, maybe that is punk rock. Lois. Lois is straight from the animated series for me. That hard-hitting reporter who loves her job and doesn't back down without finding all the answers. This movie blends the science fiction of the Silver Age with contemporary setting. The usage of news media and social media plays out exactly as it does day to day here in real life. Just look at events from this year alone and how quickly something can trend online and then make its way to late-night talk shows and news outlets. We're no longer in a period like Superman 1978 where the hot news story had to wait for the morning edition. The news is always now, in the moment. The movie captured that well. Also, the notion of the Justice Gang getting involved, setting the stage for metahumans to have active roles in foreign affairs reminded me of the very first episode of Justice League Unlimited. There's a country with an out-of-control threat. They tell the Justice League it's none of their business. The Justice League says, screw you, we're going to help. Not to mention the implications alone of having the Hall of Justice. It's exciting to think what that means for the future 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I know this movie won't be for everyone, and that's okay. What I hope, though, is that enough people give all of DC a chance. Peacemaker, Lanterns, Supergirl, Season 2 of Creature Commandos, and Clayface, and whatever else is beyond, along with the Batman Part 2. Not every comic is for everybody, but there is a comic for everybody. This is a universe I hope stays around for a long time. Stephen, what a great letter. And yes, you should totally turn that into a video piece and you can use that script. It's great. And I think you make a great point. I mean, it's not for everybody, but if you're a comic reader like me, James Gunn said that Guardians 1 was his homage or his love letter to cinema. And he said that this was his love letter to comics. I think of all the analysis that I've heard about this movie, yours captures the best, perhaps, of what James Gunn was trying to do. Now, that said, the problems that I have with the film are cinematic in nature. You know, I wanted more of it. I wanted more of those characters. I wanted more of the story. I think they made a conscious decision. You know, they were talking about how the movie was cut and reshaped and things like that. It does feel to me that it was sculpted in the edit bay maybe a bit too much. I would like to have seen, look, that scene in the Daily Planet where Lois and Jimmy and Clark are talking, and you've got Cat Grant, you've got all that activity going, you barely see Perry White. I would love to have seen 3 or 4 scenes like that Lois interview scene, and now, like our previous letter writer brought up, they could have had that interview and picked it up again, and it would have been a great bracket, but I understand why. But again, a great letter. I want to thank you for writing in. Thanks very much. Let's see if we've got some super chats, and let's see what you guys have to say. R.J. McCready, love that Thing reference. The feigning outrage on Versus the other night over you suggesting perhaps an uber alien race potentially has a different moral code was so annoying. Look, you know what? I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, it could be, and I thought it was I really was hoping that we would have a great discussion. One of my favorite people on the internet, I don't even know what she looks like, so if she was standing in front of me, I wouldn't know her, is Nerd Cookies, you know, who's also on Versus. I also even love the jazzy little theme music she has, but Nerd Cookies does a lot of great literary analysis of things like Dune, and I was kind of hoping that she would take the bait and we could have a really interesting conversation about, from a science fiction standpoint, but you know, the show's what it is. But I was trying to bring up, like a lot of people, I thought it was interesting. I mean, to me, I didn't, it's weird because I look at when somebody is retelling, if you're rebooting a character, and when it comes to comic books, how many times, you know, there's certain characters that have certain runs on comics that become iconic because they do different things. Like I have thousands of pages of X-Men behind me. I'm a huge X-Men fan. To me, Teen Titans and X-Men were the Justice League was my first love, but then in the early 80s when I started to get back into comic books again, part of the reason was because of X-Men and Teen Titans, and I love those books. But it got to the point where, you know, when you've read X-Men for 30 effing years, it's all just, you're just repeating the same things. And during the Krakoan era of X-Men, I know Hickman couldn't stay on the book, but his science fiction ideas were, to me, mind-blowing. The idea of Krakoan resurrection and all that. I'm like, oh my God, I was so interested, you know, House of X and Power 10. I was so into what Hickman was doing with the X-Men. I was totally excited. And I don't have all of it, but I probably, you know, have some of it in hardcover. I'd like to get all of it, but only Hickman really knew what was going on there. No one else could write. There are some people that did okay, but he was really the mastermind behind the Krakoan era. But there was so many weird new bits of lore, and Orcus, the villains and all that. I loved it. I was not precious about, you know, well, the X-Men have to be this way. When you've read them for 30 effing years, it gets a little tiresome. And look, you might sit there and tell me that, well, Rob, how can you have no lore problems yet you get angry about Star Trek? Well, here's the thing about Star Trek is, if you look at the Star Trek franchise as it existed since 1966 through 2005, which is really the end of the Roddenberry DNA era, where he had, I mean, I know he wasn't around when they created Deep Space Nine or Voyager or Enterprise. It was coming out of TNG and the original series. So you had 10 seasons of Star Trek that Roddenberry had his imprint on. And those people, his collaborators, then went on to work on those other shows. But the thing about Star Trek was it gave you an ongoing fictional history. Now, when you're then giving with creators that had nothing to do with that history, when you come back and you show me this swill that is Strange New Worlds, I'm like, you haven't even watched the original show. There's no attempt, especially the character of Spock, which the way Spock is a travesty. The people that are writing Spock for Strange New Worlds are not writing the character of Spock. They're writing a character they think he is, and they're trying to write up something that's analogous to them. And it's such a misreading of the character that we've known for, you know, decades. And I watch this and I'm like, this is not the way to reboot something. You can reboot something, and if you understand the essence of what it is that you're doing, give me a reboot that's smart. But if you aren't smart, and you really don't understand your subject matter, and you'd rather what you're making is a different show entirely, like Buffy the fucking Vampire Slayer, Joss Whedon's Fingerprints, you know, it's Star Trek is all Buffy and Firefly now, which is fine. Those shows are fine, but you know, maybe you should go back and watch some Star Trek. But in the case of Superman, changing the lore, it's just the reasoning, like, okay, you're still sending Superman to Earth to save his life. You still want him to be here because the people here, you know, are good people, I guess, simple-minded people. But by Jor-El telling... Remember, Jor-El thinks that Superman would have had this if, in fact... I'm going to go with this lore thinking it's real, not that it's some subterfuge. Let's just assume it's real. We might not like the idea that Superman's parents are telling him to mate with as many Earth women and take as many concubines as possible. But I would say throughout human history, there have been many societies where concubines or having... I mean, in France, they're much more tolerant of a man having a mistress outside of marriage. I mean, the mores and the ethics of our own planet have all different kinds of things depending on where you're at and whatever belief system you're living under. So that didn't bother me about the lore. So I thought we could have had a really interesting discussion about that. But being legalistic about previous Superman lore is kind of silly to me, because let's talk about this new thing that's happening rather than say, I mean, when you're changing the lore, breaking the lore is one thing. But Jor-El and Laura still sent Superman to Earth. What people were mad about is something they said how he should be after he got here. Now, the point is, Superman's not going to do that because he was raised on Earth. Superman doesn't want to go out and spread his seed and have a bunch of different concubines. I mean, maybe that would happen if he gets to be evil Superman, and Justice Superman might want to do that. Or if you're going to be the Maestro in the Hulk future, or whatever. But the whole point is that Superman he's now a person. He's from Earth. He's definitely an orphan from Krypton, but he's now believing in what his parents taught him, and he is believing in truth, justice, and the American way. So I would like to have had that conversation. So that's a long answer, R.J. McCready, but I like you bringing that up. And thanks for watching Versus. Comichead84 says, in my opinion, Batman is long overdue for the comic booky vibe this Superman film has. We got grounded and gritty for the last 20 years. Give me gadgets galore, a gymnastic Robin, and more super rogues like Poison Ivy, Freeze, Man-Bat, etc. I could not agree with you more. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be campy. You know, you can have in James Gunn's universe, Batman can have his rogues gallery. And I mean, if we're getting Clayface, a body horror Clayface movie, bring it on. We can have Man-Bat, but it won't be campy. And I think that's what James Gunn did best of all, is show us that you can do all of this. I even thought, you know, having monkeys typing, having him, that was bordering on campy, but it was also kind of horrifying at the same time. And I liked it. I think you're absolutely right. Yes. The Greyest Star. Very Tolkien. Whenever I read that. I know you didn't enjoy Thor 4 and Moon Knight. But why? Because, okay. Right, to me, the thing about... One of the things that when the MCU first started that I was really interested in was how are they going to make you believe that Iron Man, especially, I felt this way, especially after I saw Iron Man, which did a really great job of keeping it in the real world, but making you believe that Iron Man existed. Not just through Tony Stark's performance, but the way that the story unfolded. I believed, man. And then I was like, how are they going to make us believe in Asgard and Thor and the Rainbow Bridge and Earth's Midgard and what the hell? Well, you get Kenneth Branagh to direct the movie. And the tone of it worked the same way that Iron Man worked. Thor worked as well, because Kenneth Branagh knows theatrical and Shakespearean, but how to keep that down to earth. I mean, I would expect nothing else from the man who directed Cinderella, which is still one of the great Disney live-action translations, not just because it has, you know, one of our favorite ladies in it. But the tone, I thought, look, Taika Waititi did a great job with Ragnarok. It balanced it out. Thor: Love and Thunder, I didn't believe a word of it. It was so... You know, it was so over the top. It was so... I felt like I was watching a parody movie of a Thor film. And they could have done the same thing. I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe the production design. I didn't believe the look. I didn't believe the feel of that movie. I didn't believe any of the characters. I mean, that film could have been Gore the God Butcher, and the way Christian Bale portrayed it, I mean, this man, that could have been a really serious, kick-ass movie. Instead, I thought everything that was going on in that movie was undermined by the goofiness of it. Taika Waititi went off the res on that one, man. He was off, and it didn't work for me at all. Moon Knight is one of my favorite characters. I started reading comics again. What I love about Moon Knight is my Moon Knight, the Moon Knight I grew up with, reading the Doug Mensch and Sienkiewicz version, the first 30 issues of the first run of Moon Knight, was the romantic Batman. Basically, it was Batman, but he had Marlene, the woman he loved, Frenchie, the cab driver, his multiple personalities. They adapted a very late version of Moon Knight, and when they made him, look, I always thought the idea of him being schizophrenic was a great idea, and there's people that have been using that and making it great, but the character of Mark Spector and the character of Moon Knight were, I thought, terribly established, and all the Egyptian gods and people sucking the soul, it was not grounded at all. I didn't believe it, even though his hand fell off. This is one of my favorite Hot Toys figures. I'll tell you that. Just because I love Moon Knight. I mean, this Hot Toy, I love the way Moon Knight looked, but I hated the way he was depicted. But then again, they wanted to move away from... Moon Knight's had an identity problem. I love those first... Actually, it was 38 issues of the run, because then Kevin Nolan took over after Bill Sienkiewicz left. But those first 30 issues of Moon Knight are bangers. And yeah, Werewolf by Night was in it. And those are great episodes or issues as well. The Black Spectre storyline in issue 25 is great. But that's why I didn't like them. I mean, I don't think they know what they wanted to be. And I didn't think either movie did a very good job of telling the story. It was the movie or show. It was all over the place. It bummed me out, man. Boy, did I hate Love and Thunder. Diamond G says, when Superman said he's alone and probably scared, he was saying that about Krypto. I loved him saying that. I mean, I love the idea that Superman is, like I've said this a lot. Before I met Elizabeth, I never owned a dog. Now we have 4. And it's wild to me. I've got my own brood of alien entities that all have their different personalities, and I can't imagine not having dogs. I mean, my mom was a crazy cat lady, so I love cats. I had cats, but I never had a dog. And when he said he's alone and probably scared, I didn't realize this. Is probably it's silly to say it, that every dog owner throughout history knows this, but dogs are not just pets. They're entities that they have their own personalities. I've got 4 dogs that are all different, and you would never want, you think of them the way they are. They are their own entities, and you wouldn't want anything to happen to them. And when Superman said that, I love that it's kind of a foster situation, he says, and when he says Krypto's alone and all that, I love that, just like you did. Alone and probably scared. That was so great. Evan B.E. says, I just got out of Eddington and my mind is blown. My friend who saw Fantastic Four also saw Eddington and told me it was really very good. I can't wait to see it. I heard it's much better than Beau is Afraid. So Ari Aster, after he came on the scene with Midsommar and, of course, Hereditary, I mean, he's definitely one of my filmmakers to watch out there. I'll go see anything he makes. KJ says, is Star Trek V considered a guilty pleasure at this point? There is some pure joy within the film. Star Trek V is incredibly frustrating because, I read Shatner's original story treatment. I think it's called Act of Love, which is actually quite good. Again, Star Trek V suffers for me from the same problem that Love and Thunder suffers from. I mean, of course, Shatner wanted to make for his feature directorial debut, I think a really interesting, compelling story about the nature of love, the nature of pain, the nature of sacrifice. But the studio said, look, we're coming off of Star Trek IV, which is the the highest grossing Star Trek movie at this point. And people want that fun feeling. So you have what could have been a very meditative, brilliant... Star Trek V could have been, I think, right up there with the best Star Trek stories ever. But one, it had budgetary problems. It didn't have enough money, and they had ILM, they couldn't use ILM. And so you had Bran Farron doing the effects, and they were way out of their league. And Shatner, being a first-time director, probably was a little bit too ambitious. And the fact that movie's tonally at war with itself from the very beginning. And, when you see scenes where Kirk falls off a mountain and Spock literally is shooting down with his rocket boots, the credibility goes out the window. The row your boat scene, I mean, all that. But after that, there's great stuff in it. I need my pain. What does God need with the starship? The scenes with Spock and McCoy and Kirk, Sybok coming, and the idea of Sybok. I don't think he should have been Spock's brother, but it could have been a Vulcan cleric who, didn't accept the teachings of Surak, just like the Na'vi in Avatar: Fire and Ash. We're going to meet the Mordor Orc Na'vi that deny Iowa and live by a volcano. Bring it on. I mean, I think that you could remake Star Trek V. As a matter of fact, you know what? If you took the, I can't believe I'm even going to say this, the J.J. Abrams cast, which is, to be fair, a great cast. I just wish that somebody would write Zachary Quinto's a great actor, and I wish no one knows how to write Spock. Modern Star Trek does not know how to write Spock, and Zachary Quinto has been completely underserved. But you could remake Star Trek V with that J.J. Abrams cast, and you could make a banger of a movie, an emotionally affecting movie. I know a lot of people are thinking right now that I'm out of my mind, but I'm not out of my mind. When it comes to Star Trek, I'm E.F. fucking Hutton. I'm just saying. I didn't know. People are like, oh, that's nice of you to say. Isn't that not for you to say? Whatever. It's for me to say. And it could be good. But yeah, Star Trek V is a movie at war with itself that had a lot of production issues. And but I think it could have been great, but unfortunately, but there's stuff in it. I mean, I like it. I think definitely it's a guilty pleasure for sure. But I do think there's a lot in it that's good. Individual scenes, which I mean, what more do you want? I guess there's a few tips in here. Darth Plato says if Jor-El is the bad guy, then Zod must be the Antichrist. That's pretty interesting. I don't know about that. I mean, the thing about Zod is a political. He's a demagogue, but he's also got a different way of running things. And the fact is, the Kryptonians, their planet got destroyed, and maybe the way they were doing things didn't work. So, yeah, I mean. Interesting. Very interesting. Bert sends in a tip and says, after thinking super meh 25 upon first viewing, I admit the movie grew on me the second time I saw it. Clark's walk entering the Daily Planet plus the cut of his suit reminded me of All-Star Superman when he interviews Lex while clumsily following him around. Look, I agree. I think I've seen the movie twice, and I really enjoy it for what it is, and I wish it was longer because I like the characters, and like people have said tonight in those letters, I would like to have settled into it more, and I would like to have enjoyed it. Not that I didn't enjoy it, but it felt like it was a 90-minute movie. And look, to me, I am a guy that I like people talking to each other. Give me movies where people are talking to each other. And I feel like we're seeing this a lot in fantasy movies. Like, I love Denis Villeneuve's Dune. There's an argument to be made that Dune, in terms of creating a world, immersing you in a world, that Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and I would say his Blade Runner 2049 as well. I mean, the world building, you believe they shot that movie on location on Arrakis. It's incredible. But there's very few scenes where you have long conversations. Not that movie would be necessarily well served, but the conversations, especially if you know the book, are cut to the bone. And there's so many great actresses and actors, like Charlotte Rampling, that whole scene, put your hand in the box. It's all visual, and Denis Villeneuve has even said if he could, he would make a movie where nobody speaks. And I get it, but with movies like, one of the things I loved about Foundation Season 3, I've seen every episode except the 10th episode. I watched them with Bill Hunt and Alvaro. There's some great scenes. There's some great dialogue scenes in Foundation Season 3. If I understand the adaptation. A lot of people are like, oh my God, what they've done to Asimov. I mean, you can't adapt Foundation the way it was written, at least the first 3 books. So I think what they've done is really interesting. It's an adaptation. But I really like Season 3 a lot, and I like listening to people talk. Character stuff, which I've always thought's good. Let's see what we got here. Oh, that's a good one. Here's a fan letter from Kurt Pullan. It's Pullan, Pullan. Hey, Rob, I saw that you were doing letters for Superman in your next episode, so I thought I would toss my hat in the ring. We have spoken before for your 1000th episode. I go by Crazy Curdy sometimes, and we talked about post-structuralism in movies. It was awesome talking to you. Thanks. Over the past year, I've been cultivating what I think is the most important thing we humans can have, and that is compassion. Caring about each other above all else. Some people use things like religion as an excuse to discriminate against people. I grew up Catholic, and I have known people who are Catholic who are homophobic and transphobic and hateful towards certain people, which the impacts of which are vast. But I must say, Jesus was a hippie in sandals and a robe, hanging with sex workers, making wine and bread on a boat. I really don't think he hated anyone. Superman in this new James Gunniverse, the James Gunniverse, I like that. Gunniverse, that goes well, okay, is someone who strives for compassion above all else. He just wants to support, help, save people and animals. It's a beautiful sentiment, message, and film. Anyone who tries to find fault in it, to me, I wonder if they got the deeper message within it. The music, the visuals, wow. Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, and Green Lantern were my favorite, and I can't wait to see them in another movie or in Peacemaker, maybe. Anyway, I think this movie is exactly what we need, and I find it sad that people who I think need it the most are trying so hard to find things wrong with it. That's just life. Bullies and haters will bully and hate, and the rest of us will enjoy our new creative, beautiful, caring community and spread the love and the peace. Keep being your amazing self, Rob. You're my favorite person on YouTube. Kurt Pullan, a.k.a. Crazy Curdy. Well, it's very nice of you to say Crazy Curdy. But, for the most part, unless you're talking about modern Star Trek, I tend to be compassionate. I like people. I like people and all of their crazy, myriad craziness. I've always liked people. My father was a big fan of people. I like people in general. That's my go-to position. Although, that doesn't mean I like everything that goes on, and it means sometimes I take positions people find inexplicable to me. How can you be that way if you like people? I'm also a civilizationist. I want to live in a great civilization, which means you got to work at that. It's like I'm one of those sappy people that likes an American president. But when Michael Douglas gets up and gives that speech, when he talks about democracy, it's you got to want it bad. He's right. But Kurt, I think you're right. I think, look, I went and saw this movie to have a good time. I will say, I've talked to people, I told people this on the John Campea show. I went back and watched Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice a couple of weeks ago. And again, I loved it. But that movie is to love it is to get a certain flavor. And, give me all the nightmare stuff, give me Apocalypse, give me all the stuff that happens in Batman v Superman. But look, it's a movie where there's this has got the water in it. See, I'll drink it. But Jesse Eisenberg's Lex puts a mason jar of piss in front of Holly Hunter at a congressional session before blowing everybody up in Congress while Superman stands in the middle ready to testify with all of these people being vaporized around him. Now, I get it, but then, there is never, and I've said this before, and people are always throwing me a picture. There is no joy in Zack Snyder's Superman. And what I mean by that, there's moments of like, okay, Superman might be smiling and you might take joy out of it, but those movies are not about joy. They're not about exaltation. They're not about romance and love, even though in Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the ultimate version, Superman gets into a bath with Lois, and you could say that's romantic. But she's traumatized and suffering from PTSD because of what happened to her watching Jimmy Olsen get shot in the head. I mean, that film does not have any whimsy in it. That said, I like those movies for that reason. I like the overbearing, apocalyptic, Sturm und Drang, Ring of the Nibelung cycle that those movies are. Those movies are fucking Wagner. They're Wagner. They're Wagnerian down to their very core, and I love them for that. They're not family movies, though. You know, Wagner is a acquired taste. You know, and that's what I love about those films. They're Wagnerian. But not, should superhero movies be that way? I don't know. I'm not one to say. Different strokes for different folks. I like those movies for that reason. I have my hot toys from that. I'll tell you something. When Wonder Woman shows up, that's awesome. It's awesome. I love Wonder Woman. I love it, and remember, and people forget this. So you got the Zack Snyder trilogy, the Justice League trilogy, Man of Steel trilogy. I love Aquaman. I love Wonder Woman, and I love The Flash. Come at me, bro. Those are 3 movies. I hate Wonder Woman 2, and the second Aquaman was okay. But the fact that you've got, let's call it 5 movies. You can add, if you want to add, I'm not going to lie. I don't dislike Black Adam. And I don't dislike the Shazam movies either. So, for me, I take joy, like I did not like Wonder Woman 84 is terrible. Terrible movie. Doesn't even fit. The storyline doesn't even fit. And the second Aquaman movie is, I think, I don't know. But for the most part, I am a person that does not hate I don't like Birds of Prey. I didn't like Birds of Prey very much. But but for the most part, I do enjoy those films. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and try and convince everybody to love The Flash. Nor am I going to convince anybody to love Aquaman as much as I do. But remember, I'm the guy that loves Star Crash. But I like those movies for what they are. But I would not say that, you know, they're for everybody. But it's so funny when people just say, oh, The Flash sucked. Well, why? Why did it suck? I thought it was thoroughly entertaining. As somebody who's read comic books my whole life, I'm watching The Flash. You know, despite Ezra Miller's personal issues, when I'm not thinking about his real-life experiences when I'm watching the movie, he's great as Barry Allen. And anyway. Let's see. What else do I got? I got more letters to read. Mike writes in. It's a very short letter, but I want to give him his due. Mike writes in and says, Michael writes in, I don't know if you were a big Smallville fan, but in the show, Clark reads a message from Jor-El about ruling the human race with strength. The Superman movie, including this moment, was a great callback. Did Smallville originate this? Well, yeah, I mean, Smallville played with this. I don't know if it originated it. There's things in the comics where Jor-El has been played less benevolently, but it might be. I mean, it might be this particular brand of Superman, but there's been things in the comics. There's the comic book about the Superman family in 2010 when Jor-El and Laura come to Earth. There's all different kinds, but I think it's like an Elseworlds story. But, yeah. So, here is a... Let's see. Okay. You know what? I think... Oh, no. This is an interesting letter. I like this letter. This letter comes from Bob Coleman. Bob Coleman starts and says, Hi, Robert. Thanks so much for reading my letter last night regarding George Miller and the Mad Max franchise. It was an honor hearing your thoughts and observations, haha. In your last observations, you were discussing how B-movies have, for the most part, disappeared, citing Escape from New York as an example. You also mentioned The Terminator. The Terminator was one of those special films that will always hold a special place in my life, as it was one of those movies that blew my mind. I was 13 years old when I first saw it in the theater. The only other movie I had seen prior to that had the same effect on me was Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I still consider the greatest adventure movie of all time. Last year, I did a rewatch of both Terminator and T2. When T2 first came out, I felt that it was superior, but after this last rewatch, I found myself thinking the first film is superior. I agree with you. And I think it's due to the rawness of it that appealed to me more than its more polished successor. I wanted to share an excerpt of an article with you that speaks of this from Flavor Wire titled, "In Praise of the Original Terminator, a Lean, Mean Exploration Movie Machine." I don't know who wrote it, but I'll read it. When you get down to it, the 1984 Terminator is a low-budget exploitation movie. Co-writer-director James Cameron cut his teeth working for Roger Corman, devising effects on the cheap for movies like Battle Beyond the Stars, and one of the most striking things about Terminator right there in the opening is a 2029 set prologue, is how low rent the effects and sets are. Later glimpses of the bombed-out future recall not only Escape from New York, on which Cameron was credited for his visual effects and matte work, but rip-offs like 1990 The Bronx Warriors. Scenes like those, alongside the lightning effects and laser shots, betray the picture's low budget. That budget was a scant $6.5 million, which inflation adjusts just shy to $15 million today, or less than 1/10 of the Terminator Genesis budget. And it bears the stylistic watermarks of its era. The run-and-gun cinematography, the throwback fonts, and especially the synth and drum machine score make it look and feel less like the launch of a billion-dollar franchise and more like a canon movie that Chuck Norris somehow passed on. There's even a Dick Miller cameo. None of this is meant as a slam. In fact, much of Terminator's greatness is due to its low-budget aesthetic and lo-fi energy. Perhaps out of necessity, Cameron's sense of storytelling has a lean efficiency that both he and the series have long since abandoned. It runs a mere 107 minutes and doesn't really bother to explain what's happening until 45 minutes in. That's why it's great, because it's a mystery. And it sports a welcome exploitation movie ruthlessness. He's got Schwarzenegger just walking up to people's doors and killing strangers in their homes, which is quite a contrast to the softening that began with the "I swear I will not kill anyone" business of T2, and eventually resulted in the last two Terminator films landing with PG-13 ratings. Terminator is a very hard R. Some images, like Schwarzenegger coming down the police station hallway for Linda Hamilton, play like slasher horror as much as action. Cameron later said he visualized Terminator, particularly from a business standpoint, as a stylish horror movie. Visual cues like those remind us of an era in which it was made, and much of it hasn't aged all that well. Let's not talk about the oh-so-80s sex scene with its squeezing hands close-ups and synthesizer on classical piano setting, or the Friday the 13th style "It's Still Not Dead" multiple endings, but there's nothing wrong with the movie aging. It merely creates a stark contrast, because Terminator 2 seems to barely have aged at all, and it shouldn't. It feels in most ways like a modern action movie because it was the blueprint for them. The subsequent Terminator movies has followed its lead and mostly ignored from a stylistic standpoint the original. A big studio sequel can't replicate the original Terminator because it feels so distinctively homemade, from those chintzy lighting strikes to the wonderfully Harryhausen-esque stop-motion cyborg skeleton of the climax. In scenes like that, Terminator feels like it's handcrafted. The sequels, even in this respect T2, play as if they've been made by a committee. The implication isn't that a low-budget exploitation film can't blossom and bloom into a successful big-money franchise, but Terminator's ground-level aesthetic is so sharply displaced from the bloated mythology that has grown from it over the course of those 4 sequels, forgotten television series, and countless comic books, it barely seems part of the same universe. I would love to hear your thoughts on the first time you saw the original Terminator, and are there any modern films that nail the same B-movie aesthetic that the Terminator has? Also, one more thing, as Columbo would say. I have noticed that when discussing Zack Snyder's Justice League films, you use the term metal. Fuck yeah. Can you go more in depth as to what you mean by metal? Are you talking about the attitude of the film, the style? I'm just curious as to what movies you would call metal, as I'm always looking for film recommendations. The film that pops in my mind is Mad Max Fury Road. Hell, there's even the Doof Warrior rocking out on a flamethrower electric guitar in the film. Thanks, Rob. You are the man, and I, for one, am very grateful for your channel. You rock. That comes from Bob Coleman. This is a great letter, by the way. First of all, let me just answer the metal thing. When I speak about metal, I'm talking about rock and roll. I'm talking about heavy metal. Mad Max Fury Road is fucking metal. Metal! Fuck yeah! And so, look, I think Zack Snyder's Justice League movie, I mean, Wonder Woman has a metal fucking intro. That guitar riff is incredible. But everything that happens, I mean, to me, those movies are headbangers. And I think that's, whether it's aesthetically, musically, you know, when I was a kid, the very first concert I ever went to was Kiss. Back when they still had all their makeup, that right before they changed the era. It was the Dynasty tour in 1979. And I loved Kiss. Kiss to me was the horror sci-fi band, even though I didn't realize, I don't think I'd encountered Iron Maiden yet, and Eddie, you know, and those covers. But there's something about heavy metal music coming from all the horror iconography. It comes from the underworld, man. And I'm not saying that metal movies, these are movies like, whether it's superhero, look, Terminator is totally metal. And they're like, Richard Stanley's Hardware is metal. Tetsuo the Iron Man is metal. You know, and literally metal. But I think there's a certain hardcore head-banging aesthetic that makes something metal. That's up for you to decide. But I would say that there's a lot of that's what would fit the bill. Rollerball, the original Rollerball, Norman Jewison's from '75. Not just because it has a metal ball, but that movie is heavy. That movie's heavy metal, even though it's got great use of classical music. That movie's metal. Zardoz is prog rock. But as Todd Stashwick would say, prog core. Zardoz is prog core. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I mean. It's an overall feel, an overall aesthetic. I mean, look, the battle between Doomsday at the end of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is like the most metal shit ever. You literally have the metal armor Batman, and you have Diana's armor, and you have Superman, who is armored because he's Kryptonian, fighting again. I mean, it's so metal. People don't just get blasted a little bit. I mean, Doomsday is blasting half the city, and when Superman gets hit by it, it's nothing more metal than that. But the article you sent me, what I mean, and I talk about this a lot. When I was growing up watching specifically genre cinema, and I'm talking about science fiction, fantasy, and horror films, they weren't big budget affairs, you know. And if I think about movies of the 70s, like the dystopian, the Planet of the Apes movies were lavish, but they were not the most expensive movies in the world, and they were diminishing. By the time you get to Battle for the Planet of the Apes, it's not a very big battle, you know. And I loved 70s, whether it was Rollerball, whether it was The Ultimate Warrior, whether it was ZPG, Zero Population Growth, which I didn't see that until fairly recently, but A Boy and His Dog, you know, all the movies that came out pre-Star Wars in the 70s. Logan's Run was a big, lavish movie at the time. That was 76. But Zardoz is a much lusher movie than you might remember it. If you've never seen it, you should check it out because it's really interesting. But to me, what happened in the 80s was these people were making what should have been high budget epic movies, but they didn't have a lot of money. And I think that Escape from New York is one of the perfect examples. And Cameron worked on that. The thing about Escape from New York, which was so cool, these exploitation movies would have a great premise. Okay, like New York is a walled maximum security prison. Breaking out is impossible. Breaking in is insane. That was the ad line of the poster. Well, to pull that off, they didn't have a lot of money. That movie was made for less than $5 million. So how do you make Escape from New York? Like, okay, they went to a burnt out part of St. Louis and they got the back of an airplane, you know, they put it in the middle of the street and they would light up this place, and they're like, okay, these streets, because the whole thing's at night, so you don't have to, I mean, the next day you do see a few shots in daytime, but for the most part it's nighttime. The whole movie takes place almost in real time. And they were able to pull stuff off for very little money. I mean, there's some really interesting miniature work and model work and matte paintings, but like they have these digital readouts when Snake Plissken is flying, not the Gullfire, call it the Gullfire because they bring it up, but when you see it, in order to create CG looking displays, they took a model of New York and they put, like chart pack tape on it and shot it and made it look like computer displays because they didn't have computer displays that could do those graphics. So when you had Escape from New York, these were low budget movies with big budget sensibilities, and they would pull them off, and you would see them theatrically. And then I think what happened was, nowadays, if they haven't made a remake of Escape from New York, but they've tried, and I've read a number of different drafts. If they made a remake of Escape from New York, they'd do it for $150 million, and you'd get all the bells and whistles, and it'd be epic, and it'd be huge, but it would look like a big budget Hollywood production. And the difference that this article talks about is the difference between Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. Well, Terminator 2 had $100 million. It was the first $100 million movie. And in 1991, they made it very quickly. You had ILM and James Cameron continuing to work with each other. ILM did the pseudopod sequence in The Abyss. And of course, that gave way to the technology of doing the liquid metal T-1000, and all of that technology then led to the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. So James Cameron, one of the things that was, he's always pushed the R&D for the reason his movies were expensive. I mean, he went from making low-budget movies, but by the time you get to The Abyss, he's now furthering the technology, what's technologically you're capable. I mean, when I sat and watched, when I was working on Superman Returns, one of the things that they created, I was at Rhythm and Hughes. It's not in the documentary, but I went and interviewed one of the guys at Rhythm and Hughes that they had created a new computer program to simulate water. Water was one of the hardest things to do, and there's big scenes in the ocean in Superman Returns. But before that, they had like A Perfect Storm, the George Clooney movie, Mark Wahlberg and going up the fishermen that get lost at sea. But doing water was really, really hard to do. And this is in 2005 when we were making the movie. And they had this new program that, because you have to make water a particle system to make it look real. And it was awesome. And they were showing me the particle system, and it was amazing. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like photorealistic water. And if you think back to like some of the scenes in movies, especially fantasy films, this is in 1981. They have miniature helicopters. They shoot these guys on the water in the beginning of Escape from New York, and it's like stone knives and bear skins, and seeing where the computer aided technology nowadays, it's unbelievable, because the shift in technology up into a certain point, and Terminator, and especially even cinematography and the way things are shot, the film stock that they use, and the Skotax and the miniature work on Terminator, they didn't have the kind of cameras that they were using and how they were shooting and the stops and the light levels and stuff. I mean, like they said in that little snippet of that article, it all looks very handcrafted. And I think they're a little rough. I mean, when people go back and write articles like that about the Terminator to make fun of the let me just tell you, I don't care what anyone says now. If you were there, I was there opening weekend and I saw the Terminator, and you see the future war stuff, it was awesome. The hunter killers, the guys in the trucks, the intercutting between the Jeep and all that shit, it was awesome. That future war stuff was awesome. Now, there's a couple of scenes with the Stan Winston puppet, fixing it's clearly a puppet of Schwarzenegger. No one cares because it was badass. And when you saw a lot of the physical effects of those movies, I mean, not everything could be American Werewolf in London. Sometimes you'd see like the beast within, and somebody's head would pull open, and it was a little sketchy. But for the most part, technology really shifted. But the thing about those low budget movies is, what made you believe? The directors. John Carpenter had absolute conviction, and he knew how to shoot those movies. His collaborators, like James Cameron, knew how to make New York, a miniature New York, work in that film, and they had not a lot of money to do it. You look at Battle Beyond the Stars. Yeah, I can recognize some of the model kits they used to make those ships. but there was a wit and a verve. And you watch Battle Beyond the Stars, and yeah, it's a remake of The Magnificent Seven, but it's got a great script from John Sayles. It's got a great score from James Horner, even though he's ripping off Star Trek The Motion Picture. I didn't care. And you look at that movie and you think to yourself, oh my God, these people went for it. Because they know if you believe in what they're doing, if they have absolute conviction, of course, they have to know how to make movies. And I think they knew how to make movies a lot more than a lot of the people you see making movies today, because nobody gets to, like, you make one independent movie like Safety Not Guaranteed, you're Colin Trevorrow and like, hey, why don't you make the next Jurassic World movie? Oh, okay. I'm going from my $1 million movie to a $150 million reboot franchise IP, and you never actually learn how to make a movie because everyone else is doing it for you, and you're kind of looking around going, yeah, could you do another take? I mean, all these people that made these movies, Cameron, consummate filmmaker, Spielberg. You go back and you watch fucking Duel. That guy I think he was like 24 when he made Duel. You watch Duel and you think to yourself, that guy knows how to make a movie. He knows how to set up the camera and make you believe. His blocking, his shot choices, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Cameron knew how to do it. John Carpenter knew how to do it, even though I think John Carpenter, he was so beaten down as you move through his career. In the Mouth of Madness might be my favorite classic Carpenter, the last classic Carpenter movie. There's joy to be had in vampires and Ghosts of Mars, but it's, but still, those early movies, unbelievable. And that's what was in the theaters, because no one was making a $100 million Terminator movie. If you wanted to make a movie about a giant killer robot coming back in time to kill the future leader of the Resistance, you could only get $6 million. Nobody would believe that you could pull that off. And it's so funny that these are the movies that we would go see. We would go see anything. You're the Hunter from the Future. We went and saw that shit in the theater, man. Whatever came out, we didn't care. And some of it was, better than others. But a lot of these things were only getting made at that budget level. Because you couldn't, not every, and people still, there is only one Alien. If you go back and you look at even Fede Alvarez and what he did with Alien Romulus, it's good. I liked his Evil Dead. It's good. But you go back and you watch that original movie, aside from the readouts of the screens, that movie looks like it was made yesterday. Every single shot, there is a maturity. There is a maturity and an aesthetic that you need to know. And I think a lot of filmmakers today don't know it. Quentin Tarantino does, because he's such a student of film. But how many filmmakers, Christopher Nolan has his own aesthetic that I think really works very, very well. But there's not a whole lot of people left that have that they know how to make a movie that you are like, this is that person's movie. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm rambling at this point. But Bob, thanks for writing in a great, great, great letter. I have a couple. I should probably save these. I got a few more. But we've been going for a long time. And I'm sure part of you are sick of listening to me talk. But anyway, let me just make sure, and I want to make sure I get everybody's super chats and things. Rick Alfonso says, Rob, I enjoyed talking to you last Comic-Con because I also love Stone Cold and Moon Knight. Too bad I can't go this year. I'll miss talking to you more about this great Superman movie. Did you also collect Superman comics? I did. I didn't, Superman was not in my weekly pickup thing, but I picked up certain eras of Superman. Like I was reading the Byrne reboot of Superman. I liked, the 80s Superman comics, the 70s Superman comics were kind of all over the place, but yeah, in the mid 80s and 90s, I read a lot of Superman, and I really, really did like the reign of the Superman storyline after Superman died. I did, when Action Comics came back and the Dan Jurgens era and all that stuff. I like that. I liked all those things, and I have a lot of them in here too. But what I really liked were the Superman miniseries, things like Red Sun or Superman for All Seasons, and I did like All Stars Superman and that kind of stuff. But I also I read a lot of comics like the Justice League that had Superman in them. Freighterman 011 says, why are people hating on Ari Aster? Sorry to change the subject. Also, an aside, great to see the Snyder Bros cry. Man of Steel sucks, in my opinion. Well, I liked it. I like Man of Steel as a science. I see it more as a science fiction movie than I do as a superhero movie. I don't know why people are hating on Ari Aster. I mean, I think that Hereditary and Midsummer. I mean, look, does Hereditary owe a lot to movies like Rosemary's Baby, and does Midsummer owe a lot to The Wicker Man? Yeah, but I like what he was doing. I did not like Beau is Afraid very much, but I've heard Eddington is quite good, and I want to go see it. So I don't know why people would be hating on him. Friderman also said, love you, Rob. Forgot to say that. Well, you don't have to say it. Love you too, though. Nova 1972X says, Lex restored the message. Why does everyone in the movie believe Lex? Totally within Lex's ability and character to manipulate the message. I think this will be retconned in a future movie. Could be. Could be. I don't know. We could see. We shall see. Or I do think it's interesting if it wasn't. But yeah, Lex could have manipulated. But how did he know how to speak Kryptonian? I don't know. Darth Plato said I missed a tip. No, I haven't gone back to the tips yet. But I will go back to them. Hot Dog on a Stick says, just a tip. Wait, just that tip? Just the tip. Oh, you know how to play that game. The just the tip game. You know, those are only games that you play when you're a teenager, right? Or in college, I suppose. Well, I read your the Antichrist thing, and I read Bert's tip. Oh, Darth Plato has another tip. I didn't see this first. It must come in later. I can't help but say that the reasoning in the comics is not a helpful rubric for what should or shouldn't be in a comic book movie. If we accept this reasoning, then we could end up with Superman and Big Barda doing a porno movie together. Pass. I would watch the hell out of that. Who doesn't love Big Barda? You know, it's funny. I dated this girl when I worked at Warner Brothers that I thought she was so sexy, but she reminded me of Big Barda. And you can't tell her that. She would have busted me in the chops, but in a good way. You know, you have to love. I mean, come on, Big Barda and Mr. Miracle. That's one of the great romances. But I think Darth Plato. I think you have a good point. Like, I don't think anyone like Axel Braun would make a movie with Superman and Big Barda, porno movie. But yeah, you have to use the comic book medium as a rubric. But the thing is, if you look at what has been done in comic books, like, you know, Dark Knight, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and Frank Miller's whole Daredevil run with Elektra and Bullseye, but then when he went on and did Elektra Assassin and things like that, when these characters are definitely brought up into the adult world. But yeah, I do think that you have to be mindful if you are making a comic book adaptation, you have to use the comic books as a some kind of a signpost in terms of what it is that you're doing. You know, I think making these characters... Look, I thought that Superman and Lois was really, actually, I can't say like totally great series, but I love the idea that the one thing superpowers can't bring you is knowing how to be a good father. That was a really interesting thing to do. Because, you know, how do you hurt Superman? If he's invulnerable, you can hurt his family. And that, I really liked what they did in that show. And, you know, it is still Superman. It's so funny to me that you go in this direction where we grow up and we want our superheroes to grow up with us. And so we demand, as we become older and move into, you know, our second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth decades, seventh, eighth, whatever, we have this inclination to want our characters to grow up with us. So we want our superheroes to now reflect our lives. So it's a weird kind of a thing that's why I thought, like, the MCU to me was the perfect distillation, especially the first 3 phases, from Iron Man to, I mean, I call it the end of Endgame. Far From Home is actually the end of phase 3, but if you look at the first 22 movies of the Infinity Saga and you go from Iron Man 1 to Endgame, that was a perfect progression, at least in my mind, in terms of dealing with those issues. I mean, really masterful stuff. So, but yeah, I do think you always have to be mindful of the comic book origins. All right, well, that is going to be it. Wait, somebody just fired in a couple of more super chats. Hot Dog on a Stick 97 says, off topic, but what did you think of the weapons script? I really like the weapons script, and I can't wait to see the movie, but I have thoughts. And I am. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Zach Kreger made Barbarian, and Barbarian as a script, as a writing experience. To read that script, I read the script before I saw the movie. I was like, holy shit. Weapons was kind of the same thing. And there's a script that he also wrote, which, let's call it, it's kind of untitled. I just call it Second Coming because it said it might be called that. He wrote another script that it's a space script. It takes place in outer space that I would pay good money to see right now. I think Zach Kreger is a very talented guy, and I think that he's bringing us genre material. I think Weapons looks incredible. Everybody who the people that I know that are involved with it say it turned out extraordinarily well, and I can't wait to see it. Although I'm really interested to see how it, let's just call it, plays out. I don't want to say anything about this script to anybody. I don't want to get in trouble, but I can't fucking wait to see Weapons. My hopes are very, my level of excitement for Weapons is extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. Let's say that. And just so you guys know, if Zach Kreger ever gets to make a movie that has to deal with outer space, all I could say is be excited, because man, if I was given, Project Hail Mary is coming out, if somebody said, Rob, if there's anything that you've read recently, a script or something that you would greenlight, that you would put into production, and the thing is, it's got big people behind it, so I'm sure it's going to get made. It would be Zach Kreger's. Just call it Zach Kreger's space script. Just call it that. And by the way, I'm giving you a warning. If this Zach Kreger space script ever gets made, don't even watch the fucking trailers, because they will fucking tell you that script. I read that script like Zach Kreger wants to do. I read this script and there's jaw drop. There's something that happens that's so jaw dropping. I don't even want to tell you. I literally was like, I exclaimed, "Holy shit!" It was that like it was something I didn't see coming. It was awesome. So if Zach Kreger ever makes an outer space movie, don't watch the trailers. Don't read anything about it. Just take Uncle Bob's advice here. Zach Kreger makes a movie that takes place in space. You don't want to know anything about it. You want to go in cold. Don't let anyone tell you anything about it. And if you like, movies that take place in space, space movie. That's all. They should just say Zach Kreger's space movie, and that's all they should say. They shouldn't say anything. You should know nothing. If there's a movie that I could implore to everyone to not learn, and by the way, this movie's not even in production. It's just a script. Maybe no one will ever make it. Who knows? But if they do, they should just call it Zach Kreger's space movie, and that's it. They don't tell you anything else. I don't even want to know who's in it. Just trust me on this. Zach Kreger's space movie. That's what they should call it. And then and they should put an asterisk next to space movie, because that's not the real title. And they'll have the real title at the end. Man, I want to see this movie so bad. But you asked about Weapons. So I can't wait to see Weapons. Can't wait. Have you seen it? Hot Dog on a Stick? Has anyone seen it? Harmon D says Superman and Lois was perfect, Rob. It was really good. Superman and Lois was really, really good. Not as good as Zach Cregger's space movie. But, yeah, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Woo! That script. Boy, I want to see that movie. There's some actually... There are some good scripts out there. I hope another one I read that I don't even know. Panos Cosmatos is supposed to be making a script called Flesh of the Beast. I think it's called Flesh of the Beast that Andy Kevin Walker wrote. That's another one, man. They keep saying, it's going to get made. It's Kristen Stewart and I think Oscar Isaac are supposed to be in it. It takes place in the 80s. Woo! I want to see that too. Please go make that. Why isn't that in production? I don't know. I don't know who these people are that make these decisions. Here you've got this material. Just make this. Zach Cregger's space movie and Panos Cosmatos' Flesh of the Beast. Is it Flesh of the Beast? I don't remember. I don't remember the title. But it was written by Andy Kevin Walker. I want to see that too. You heard it from Uncle Bob. Zach Cregger's space movie. That's all you need to know. Don't tell anybody at all. They should just listen. Whoever makes that movie, that's what you call it. Don't tell anybody. Don't even show anybody a clip, except that it takes place in space. That's it. That's all you have to know. Don't know anything else. So, yeah. Watch, somebody's going to get pissed I even mentioned it. I don't know. Shouldn't say these things, Rob. I didn't sign any NDA. I'm not under any, I just do this for my own edification, but I'm telling you, I'm right on this. I'm right on this. Zach Cregger space movie. And it's not even being made right now that I know of. But it's going to be a baller, let me tell you. So that was it. I think that's it. I think I am finished. Yeah. All right, everybody. First of all, I want to thank everybody for writing in. Now, I still have more letters to write. Don't think if I haven't got to your letter yet doesn't mean I don't like you or that I haven't read your letter. I will read your letter, and I'll try and read more letters as I go. I just want to do an all-letter show about Superman because people have written some good Superman stuff. So, remember... I'm working on having our worldwide internet premiere of White Devils, a movie that I produced that was directed by Gabe Bologna, who directed Tango Shalom, a.k.a. Forbidden Tango. You can watch Forbidden Tango, a movie I produced and edited. I was the VFX supervisor, and I was the post-production supervisor. You can see that now on Amazon, although the beautiful title card that says Tango Shalom, that was a great effect shot, got taken out of it by a distributor. And it's just got this lame placeholder that's embarrassing. But you can still see it on the DVD. And I'll show it to you if you want. So you can go see that on Amazon. Of course, you can get True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, written by the great Max Allan Collins, who he and I will be appearing on stage together at Comic-Con on Friday. Next Friday, a week from tomorrow, I believe, at 4 o'clock. And come see the panels, the movie, the 1985, The Greatest Geek Year Ever, and the Inglorious Trexperts panel on Thursday, and of course on Sunday, Starship SmackDown. And you can get True Noir at all 10 episodes. It's 4.5 hours long at truenoir.co. truenoir.co. I want to thank everybody for writing in and generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I will be back tomorrow night. I unfortunately can't make it up to Seattle to go to my 40th high school reunion. Yeesh. But everyone's going to have a good time. And Claudia Castiglione, sorry, I'm going to miss you. Anyway, on that note, remember, every person has a story to tell. Every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And what are we going to do when we hear about Zach Cregger's space movie? You're not going to watch a trailer. You're not going to talk to anybody. You're not going to read anything about it. You're going to go in that movie spoiler-free. And trust me on this. Spoiler-free, Zach Cregger's space movie. If it ever gets made, no one should tell anybody about that movie. Just go in and watch it cold. It'll be one of the greatest experiences you'll ever have, if they pull it off. So, I don't know. And on that note, go see Superman again. Why not? I think it's been doing banger midweek business. Fantastic Four, by the way, seems to be very, very good, according to my buddy who saw it today. He said it's surprisingly self-contained. In its own universe, obviously. It doesn't really spill over, even in the post-credit scenes, into its own thing. And he said it was like classic Marvel, and he really, really liked it a lot. And he said that Pedro Pascal is actually very good as Reed Richards. And I trust him. I know people are like, that's what he said. And on that note, I'll see you later.